So, when I was working remotely as a programmer about 5 years ago, me and two buddies decided to test some new camera drones in the national forest outside Denver. We packed 3 drones, spare batteries, and 2 controllers. After lunch, we drove up, parked at a pullout, and hiked to a bare ridge with a clean view. We wanted a quiet place to run battery tests. We flew 1 drone at a time. Slow grid passes, altitude holds, return to home. The feed looked steady. A hawk drifted below us. We swapped batteries and taped an action camera to one airframe to see how it handled the weight. Everything behaved. It felt routine. By late afternoon, the light turned orange. We had enough footage and started talking about camp and noodles and a sunrise flight. The campground we liked was crammed. A big family reunion had taken every site. Kids in matching shirts ran between tents. A generator hummed near the bathrooms. We did 2 loops, got nothing, and pulled by the dumpsters. The sun was dropping. None of us wanted to drive home, and none of us wanted to sleep in the truck. We unfolded a paper map and looked at the logging roads. We picked a spur we did not know, farther east past 2 creek crossings. I put the truck in 4 high and rolled out. Pavement turned to washboard, then ruts. The road narrowed and the brush scraped the mirrors. Old signs were bent and peppered with holes. We passed a cattle guard and a rusted gate chained open. It felt empty back there. The deeper we went, the fewer camp signs we saw. No fresh fire rings or tire dust. Shadows got long. We checked a wide spot, but it sloped to a ditch that smelled swampy. We kept going. The map stopped matching the forks. I drove by what the headlights showed. Roots, stones, the next bend. Each time we said we would turn around, we went a little farther. After about an hour of bumpy driving, we came to a road blocked with concrete barriers. They had chipped corners and spray paint tags. Someone had pushed them around before. Tire tracks went up a dirt ramp and through a narrow gap. It was not a real gate, more like a warning. We cut the engine and listened. Wind in the trees and the tick of hot metal. My truck had decent clearance, so we managed to get past. I put a wheel on the dirt, eased over slow, and folded the mirrors. On the other side, the road turned to old gray gravel and dipped toward darker trees. We rolled the windows down. A thin sound of water came and went with the turns. The track bent left and opened into a clearing by a stream. There was this makeshift shelter there, just some tarps stretched between trees and a broken picnic table. The tarps were sun-faded and frayed at the grommets. Rope lines had been cut and tied back with ugly knots. A plastic chair lay on its side. A piece of rebar stuck out of the ground like a stake. The stream ran on the far edge. No tents, no cooking fire, no coolers. The whole area was littered with trash, but not normal camp trash. Empty gas cans lay in the grass. Chemical jugs with hazard icons sat open. A cracked plastic tote lay warped under the table. Clear tubing was coiled near a leg. A fertilizer bag was ripped, its clumps hardened like rocks. Burned spots on the gravel marked where something hot had sat. A blackened metal rack. The air bit like cleaner and fuel. We got out careful. I left the key in and killed the dome light. One buddy stepped on sealed coffee filters. The other swept his flashlight across the tarps. I dipped a hand in the stream, wiped it on my jeans, and looked at the far bank. It was undercut. Someone had stacked a pallet and rocks into a low wall. It looked wrong. We did not talk much. It did not feel like a place to talk loud. I scanned for sleeping bags or food. There were none. A bucket with a hole near the bottom sat stained yellow. An extension cord ran from under a tarp to a generator frame with no engine, its end stripped. Duct tape, a melted spoon, and a torn notebook page sat on the table, the pencil lines smeared. I checked the ground for tracks. There were deep heels from a hard-soled shoe crossing big lug prints. fresh enough to hold shape, not damp. Crushed water jugs lay flat. Bent tent stakes sat in a pile. No food wrappers, no beer bottles. The clearing was just big enough to turn around. The edges looked soft. The stream noise covered other sounds. I did not want to touch anything. My buddies did not either. We stood a few feet apart and looked. Headlamps made small cones and the trees swallowed the light. I thought about the barriers and realized we were on the wrong side of somebody's line. Not a park gate or sign. Somebody's line. That sat heavy. "Let's be quick," I said. We did one slow circle with our eyes. There were nitrile gloves stuck to the dirt, a spoon handle fused to a cup, and a rag stiff with clear flakes. The stream kept its steady sound. No crickets, engines, or voices. It felt like we had walked into a room right after everyone walked out. I kept counting steps back to the truck without meaning to. We stayed off the pallets and did not lift anything. We stepped back toward the truck. Boots on gravel sounded too loud. I did not like turning my back to the trees, so I watched the tarps and walked sideways. The truck ticked as it cooled. We climbed in with the lights off and pulled the doors slow so the seals would not thump. It looked wrong for a campsite. No one would sleep under tarps like that with no bedrolls, no food, and a broken table. Everything there was for doing, not staying. The trash was not the kind you leave after a weekend. It was the kind you do not want to put in a bin. We were not sure what to call it. We figured someone had been dumping garbage illegally, even though it seemed like a weird place for it. We set up our tents and pulled the truck closer to the stream. We built a small fire inside a ring of stones. It was quiet except for the water. We boiled noodles and heated a small pan for sausages. We had a few beers. The sky was clear. We kept our drones and cameras in the truck and locked the cases. I hid the truck keys in the hitch cover behind the bumper like I always do. It was probably around midnight when we noticed a glow behind a low hill about a quarter mile away. It was not moonlight. The angle was wrong. It did not move or flicker like a fire. It had that steady city glow look. But there was nothing like that out there. No roads on the map. No houses. We watched it for a minute, and it did not change. Tom said it was weird. We talked about going to see it. Ryan said he would stay and watch the camp. Tom and I grabbed our flashlights and put on jackets. I checked the truck lock and patted the hitch. Still there. Ryan stretched out and said his stomach felt off from the whiskey. We kicked dirt over the edges of the fire to lower the light. We took the path along the stream and then cut up toward the glow. It stayed steady. No engine sound. No voices. The ground climbed and got rocky. Our lights picked up tree trunks and low branches. We kept a slow pace to keep quiet. The air smelled dusty and sharp from the cut brush. We could see the top of the hill as a dark line. The glow sat on the far side. We moved with our beams down to our boots. As we got closer, we noticed the trees. Someone had cut the bark in perfect rings around the trunks, dozens of them. Waist high, knee high, some shoulder high. Clean, even lines. It looked like a practice cut. It looked fresh on a few, older on others. It was not random. We stopped and counted 5 in one small patch. We made a dumb joke about tree art. We kept walking. We should have stayed quiet. We were talking a little too loud. Tom tripped on a root and slammed his shin and said a loud curse. The sound bounced off the hill. The glow on the other side went out like a switch. No fade. Just gone. We stood still and listened. Nothing. No engine starting, no footstep, no metal. We looked at each other. We did not want to see what was back there anymore. We clicked our flashlights off and let our eyes adjust. The moon gave just enough to see the pale rocks and the lighter parts of the path. We went back the way we came. Slow steps, controlled breathing, No more talking. The stream sound grew again and covered small noises. When we got within a couple 100 yards of the campsite, I saw a shape moving between our tents. A person with a hooded jacket. They held something and moved slow. They were checking the table and the gear tubs, looking into the tents, walking a tight circle like they were doing a sweep. I thought it was Ryan at first. The shape was about his size. I hissed his name. No answer. The person kept moving. We called out again. Normal voice. Our tent rustled and Ryan stumbled out. He looked sweaty and pale. He was barefoot and the whiskey was still on him. He blinked at us and asked if we had been gone long. We pointed at the person and he shook his head. He said he had been out in his tent. He looked at our truck and then at our camp chairs. He did not look steady. We moved faster. The person was not there now. The edge of the clearing was empty. We checked the truck. The cases were still locked. The hitch cover sat askew with a smear on it. My fingers touched grit where it was clean before. The keys were still in the pocket behind the cover where I had wedged them. Someone had felt around. The lid on the cooler was open. We spread out with our lights low. No footprints showed clear in the gravel, just scuffs. A chair had been moved 2 feet. The zipper on my tent was half open. The handle of the cooking knife was out of the tub. It looked like someone was fast and had a plan for what to check. I thought of our SD cards in their little bag in the camera case. I thought of the glow shutting off. We started packing fast. No talking. Tom collapsed the chairs. Ryan dumped the pot and kicked dirt over the coals. I unlocked the truck and threw the cases in. I did not like the noise the locks made. I put the keys in my front pocket. We agreed to leave. We could sleep at a motel back in town. No argument from anyone. A white light hit us from the trees. Hard, narrow, head high. It washed the camp and made the stream fade. We froze. A figure stood 10 yards back from the first tarp line. The hood was up. The light was in one hand. The other hand was on something at the waist. The voice was flat. Keys, it said. Cards. That was it. I raised one hand and showed my empty palm. Okay, I said. I set the keys on the table. I opened the camera case and pulled the little zip bag with the SD cards. My hands shook. I put the bag next to the keys and stepped back. Tom kept his hands up. Ryan stood still and stared at the ground. The figure walked in slow and kept the beam on our faces. I could not see a face. A small handgun sat in the other hand, down and close. Not pointed, but there. The figure pocketed the cards, picked up the keys, and stepped to the truck. The beam slid to our feet. We stayed put. They flipped the truck on lock, opened the back, and tossed through the cases. Fast and practiced. They ignored clothes and food. They lifted drone cases, opened one, checked for a card slot, and closed it again. They went to the table and grabbed our phones. They set them face down and took the battery from Tom's camera and dropped it in a pocket. Then the figure backed up. "Walk," the voice said. "Down." The light moved toward the road. We started moving, slow at first, then faster when the beam pushed us. We followed the gravel lane back toward the barriers. The light stayed on our shoulders. We heard metal behind us. A short hiss. Tires sighing. I knew what that sound was. Slashed sidewalls. We reached the curve and the light cut to black. We kept walking. No one talked. We heard the stream in our boots. A single shot cracked back by the camp and bounced off the hill. It was not aimed at us. It was a message. We walked faster. Ryan breathed hard. Tom kept looking over his shoulder. I kept my hands open and empty. We moved by moonlight until the road widened and the trees pulled back. The air felt colder. We hit the concrete barriers at the top of the hour, I think. My phone had no bars. We climbed the dirt ramp and squeezed around. We got to the other side and did not stop. We kept to the middle of the road and listened. We saw no other lights behind us. We walked for a long time. A pickup with a fly rod in the back rolled toward us near dawn. I stepped out and waved both arms. The driver stopped with space between us and cracked his window. I said we needed to call for help. He nodded and handed me his phone and watched our hands. A deputy met us at the highway pullout an hour later. He listened, told us to wait there, and then 2 trucks went in. They brought us water and a blanket and told us to sit on the tailgate. I did not ask questions. I watched the tree line and kept my eyes open. They came back after the sun was up. They had my keys. They said our truck was still there on flats, tents cut, fire pit cold. The deputy asked us for the memory cards and I told him they were gone. He wrote that down. He told us not to go back on closed roads. He said to drive to town for a statement. We nodded. We got a tow and followed it out. We passed the campground with the reunion and kept driving. I looked in the mirror at the mountains and did not see any glow. I did not see anyone on the road. We did not stop until we were in the sheriff's lot. When I was 9 years old, my sister Carol and I used to walk home from school through Riverside Park in Oregon. Our dad was a trucker and gone most of the time, so we learned to be pretty independent kids. The park was the shortest route to our house on the edge of town, and we loved playing tag between the playground and the old brick warehouse that had been empty for years. That October afternoon, our teacher Mrs. Jones couldn't give us a ride because her car was in the shop. We didn't mind walking home alone since we did it all the time. The weather was nice, and we were looking forward to our usual race around the warehouse. Little did we know this walk would haunt me for decades. We left the school at 3 like always. The bell rang and kids spilled out, backpacks slipping on shoulders. I carried a spiral notebook. Carol had a red jacket tied around her waist. The sun sat low but warm. On the path, gulls argued over a sandwich by the trash can. The pond had green scum at the edges. Everything looked normal. At the playground, I stopped to tighten my shoe. Dust stuck to my sock. The slide felt cold to my palm. Carol climbed a low wall and balanced like a gymnast. The warehouse rose behind the swings, 3 stories, windows black and some broken. A steel door was chained with a heavy lock. A faded sign read, "Martin Feed Co." Beside it, a shopping cart sat half sunk in the dirt. We liked to run around the corner and slap the brick. That day, small things felt off. A trash can was tipped over, and an energy drink enrolled in the breeze. Someone had left a cigarette half-smoked and crushed at the edge of the sandbox. There were muddy boot prints near the service drive. They were big and fresh. We joked maybe the city would turn the place into a skate park, but I kept glancing at the dark doorway where the chains sagged more than usual. I didn't say anything. We just wanted to beat each other to the corner. We cut across the grass like always. It shaved a minute. The grass was damp and left dark marks on our shoes. A white pickup sat far back by the trees with an open bed. No plate on the front. The driver window was cracked. A piece of blue tarp lay crumpled in the bed, and a yellow rope was coiled neat. I smelled gasoline, faint but there. A crow pecked at a paper bag, then hopped away. Carol said, "I bet I beat you," and took off. I followed slower, notebook under my arm. Somewhere a siren sounded. I scraped my knuckle on a splinter from a bench and wiped the dot of blood on my jeans. We neared the corner when I heard a short scuff, like a shoe sliding, and a sharp breath. I thought maybe a cat or a person moving boxes. The warehouse had been empty for years, but sometimes older kids snuck in to smoke. I listened, but the sound stopped. We walked past the swings and down to the back side where the delivery ramp sloped. The concrete was cracked with weeds. Old pallets leaned against the wall, gray with age. One had a fresh gouge, light wood showing. Carol skipped ahead and then paused, head tilted. I felt a small warning inside but kept moving. The fence had a gap kids used to cut to the creek. The weeds around that gap were bent down like someone had just gone through. On the other side, a narrow lane ran behind the building, hidden from the street. As we got near the warehouse, Carol was running ahead like always when we heard shouting and what sounded like a struggle coming from behind the building. The noise hit quick, and then muffled, like a hand over a mouth and heels scraping concrete. I called out to Carol and pointed toward the noise, and we both crept closer to investigate. We didn't talk. We moved along the wall, keeping low, like a game but not funny now. A word came through. Stop. Then a thud. We reached the fence gap and looked through. A middle-aged man in work clothes was holding down a young woman who was trying to get away. He had a gray cap and oil stains on his shirt, keys clipped to his belt. The woman's hair was yanked, her face red, one shoe off. She pushed at his chest and twisted, but he pinned her with his arm across her neck. The ground under them had dark spots, oil or old water. A white bucket lay on its side, rolling slow. The woman was screaming and fighting back, but the man was much stronger than her. It wasn't like TV. It was messy and close. Her scream broke and turned to a choking sound. I could smell sweat and old grain from the loading bay. The keys on his belt jingled as he shifted his weight. He said something low I couldn't catch. She kicked and her bare foot hit the bucket and it spun, rattling against the wall. I saw a scrape on her knee and a thread pulled from her shirt. We were both too scared to get closer or call for help. We had no phone. The nearest house was across the park, past the pond and the field. The pickup sat by the trees, silent. In the back window, a sunshade with a cartoon looked out at us. I checked the road and saw no cars. The sky felt colder, though the sun was still there. "We need to go," I whispered. Carol stared at me, eyes wide, and nodded. I grabbed Carol's hand, and we ran home a different way, avoiding the center of the park completely. Mom was in the kitchen peeling potatoes when we came in. I shut the door and locked it. Carol went straight to the sink and washed her hands like she touched something dirty. I told Mom what we saw. I said the man had keys on his belt, oil on his shirt, a gray cap. I said the woman had one shoe off and a scrape on her knee. Mom kept cooking. She said, "Girls, that building is empty." I repeated myself. Carol nodded and didn't look up. Mom sighed and wiped her hands on a towel. She asked if we were sure it wasn't kids playing rough or a prank. I felt heat in my face and I said no. The words stuck. Carol's chin started to tremble. She said, "He was choking her." Then we both started crying for real. Mom changed then. She took the phone off the wall and called. She used a firm voice. "I need to report something my daughter's witnessed," she said. She gave our address and the warehouse name. She told us to sit at the table. We sat with wet cheeks and red eyes. I could feel the grit under my nails from the park. The house was quiet except for the fridge hum and the clock. Mom kept glancing at the window like she was expecting someone to look in. When the knock came, she jumped. 2 officers came in, one older, one younger. They took notes in small pads and asked us to start from the beginning. I told it step by step. They kept asking for the time. I said around 3:30. They asked about the man's face. I said middle-aged, stubble, maybe a scar, but I wasn't sure. They asked about the truck. I said a white pickup, old, no plate on the front. The older officer asked if the woman said a name. I said no. Carol added that the man said something low she couldn't hear. They wrote it down. They radioed someone. The older one told Mom they would drive over and take a look. We waited after they left. Mom cleaned the already clean counter. Carol lined up her pencils by size. I watched the street. The sun moved down and the room got shadowed. You could hear traffic from the main road. A siren passed and faded. Mom made us hot chocolate even though it was too sweet. The phone rang about an hour later. Mom said, "Yes. Okay. Thank you." Then she hung up and looked at us. "They didn't find anyone," she said. "No signs of a struggle. Just some grass pushed down by the fence. They took your statements. Without more, there's not much they can do." I remember the way she said it. Calm, like she was trying to put a lid on it. She told us to stay away from the park for now. She said we did the right thing. We did homework that night at the table. The TV stayed off. Every sound outside made me look up. We started taking the long way home the next day. It added 20 minutes and a boring walk along the bus line and the tire shop. The sidewalk there was cracked and the curb had weeds. We passed a laundromat that always smelled like hot soap. Carol didn't run ahead anymore. We kept close. If a truck slowed, we moved farther back from the curb. If a man looked at us too long, we crossed the street. We were quiet. Days went by. No one called us. No news reports mentioned the warehouse. Mom scanned the paper and said nothing. At school, I drew a picture in art class of the warehouse with blank windows. The teacher said it looked moody. I threw it away. On Saturdays, if we had to cross near the park for groceries, Mom shifted the grocery bags to the other hand and kept her keys between her fingers like claws. We didn't talk about why. After a few weeks, the edges of it dulled. Christmas displays went up early. People in the neighborhood put lights on porches. The park got wet and muddy. You could see your breath in the morning. Nothing else happened. No posters of a missing person appeared. No parents warned us about a danger at the warehouse. It turned into a story that lived only at our table and in our heads. We started to wonder if our minds had added pieces. Maybe the woman got away and left angry. Maybe the man was her boyfriend and it was a bad fight. You tell yourself these things because it is easier to walk past a place if you think it is ordinary. When I was 12, we packed a moving truck. Dad got a set route out of state. We took down the curtains and rolled the rug. I found the spiral notebook from that day under my bed, bent at the corners. I tossed it in a box. We drove past the edge of the park one last time. I looked for the white pickup. It wasn't there. The warehouse standed with its black windows. I pressed my hand to the car window until the building disappeared in the mirror. Life layered over it. New schools, new streets, jobs, child, bills. Sometimes I would hear keys jingle on someone's belt and feel stiff for a second. It passed. For years, I told myself we probably saw a fight. It bothered me less when I kept it small. Last month, my daughter needed to do a project on local history. She had to pick a case or event. We were at the dining table with my laptop and a stack of printed articles. She typed, and I sorted links. I clicked a county archive page that had old cases. The title said, "Missing Persons, 1998-2005. I scrolled. A photo stopped me. Dark hair, thin gold chain. A description. Late teens to early 20s, last seen near Riverside Park in October, wearing a white sneaker with a blue stripe and a denim jacket. The date hit me. The detail about one shoe hit harder. My hands went cold. I clicked the report. It said she left a shift at a grocery store and never made it home. A witness thought they heard shouting near an old warehouse but could not give a description. The case was still open. I called Carol right then. She picked up on the third ring. I said the name from the report. Silence then. I remember her hair. Carol said, one shoe. We went quiet. We were two kids again behind a fence. Then Carol said, "Do you still have the police case number?" I didn't. We hadn't kept that paper. We wrote down the cold case unit number from the site. I spoke to a woman who said her name and badge. I gave her my name and told her I was a witness from decades ago. I gave our old address, the school name, our teacher's name, everything I could drag up. I described the man as best I could. Gray cap, oil-stained shirt, keys on his belt, white pickup with no front plate. The woman on the phone typed. I could hear the keys and a faint radio in the background. She said they would add our statements to the file. She said they did not have the original patrol log from that day, but they had a few reports of suspicious activity near the warehouse over several years. She didn't promise anything. She was straightforward. Memory is tricky after so long, she said, but sometimes small details match something else. I asked if the case had any suspects. She said she couldn't share that. She asked if we were willing to come in to give a formal statement. I said yes. Carol said yes, separately. We scheduled times. After the call, I sat for a long minute. My daughter watched me. I told her in short words what we had seen when I was her age. She listened and stayed close. We both realized we might have witnessed a real crime that day. We gave our statements and sent in a rough map of where we stood behind the fence. After all these years, there isn't much they can do with just our childhood memories. Evidence is gone. People moved. Records got boxed and lost. I still wonder if we could have done more to help that woman, and whether speaking up sooner might have made a difference. I was working for this Chinese food delivery service during college, just picking up shifts when the regular drivers were sick or busy. Trucks were parked tight along chain link, tarps tied over loads. I slowed to read painted letters on buildings, but a lot of them were faded or spray painted over. My phone sat in the cup holder, screen bright with directions, and the voice kept saying, "In 500 feet, turn right." My headlights rolled over pallets and a stack of tires. Somewhere nearby, a metal sheet banged in the wind, a regular clatter. I kept thinking about the note to go to the back door. That made sense for a late shift. I pictured a night janitor or a guy in a small office, sleeves rolled up, counting inventory. I wasn't worried yet, just paying attention. I passed two buildings with numbers that didn't match. One had a plastic banner falling off the wall. Another had letters missing, so it just said WRHUS. I checked the ticket again. The zip code matched the map. The route had me do a small loop and then head deeper toward the river. My tires crossed a small patch of water and made that slip sound. I could see my breath slightly in the wash of my dashboard light. By then the radio was off, and I could hear the wet squeak of my wipers every few seconds. I almost turned around once to reconfirm with the restaurant, but I didn't want to bug my boss for what was probably fine. I told myself to just find the back door, hand over the food, and move on to the next call if it came in. The bag sat there, steam fogging a corner of the plastic. The address led me to this huge complex of industrial buildings, most of them looking pretty run down. I drove around for a few minutes trying to find the right building number, but none of them were marked clearly. Finally, I found what I thought was the right place, but it looked completely abandoned. The parking lot was cracked and full of weeds, no cars anywhere, no lights on inside. The building had those roll-up metal doors that were all rusted shut, and most of the windows were either boarded up or had bars on them. I sat in my car for a minute trying to figure out if I had the wrong address. There were no signs of any business operating there. No electrical lines running to the building that I could see. I coasted along the length of the structure with my window down a few inches. Gravel popped under my tires. Up close, The walls were covered in flaking gray paint, and there were black streaks under the sills where rain bled dirt. A torn poster hung by one staple and slapped the brick when a gust hit it. The number painted near the corner was half gone. It could have been a 6 or an 8. My GPS arrow hovered like it was confused too. On the far side was a loading dock with a bent railing. A dumpster sat crooked with its lid open, and a ladder lay on the ground with one rung missing. I paused there and checked the ticket again, ran my finger under the street name to feel the indent from the printer. It matched what the map said. My clock said 9:32. The soup would still be hot if I delivered now, but every minute made it riskier. I watched the windows for any movement. Nothing. Just a reflection of my headlight beam shaking a little. I thought about calling the number again. I even typed it and stared at it, the extra dash weird in the middle. I deleted the dash and tried to see if that changed the contact, then changed it back because I didn't want to misdial and get some stranger. My hands were clean, I had wiped them on a napkin, but the phone still had a film on the screen from the kitchen. I put it down. I rolled forward to the back corner and let my lights sweep the wall. The roll-up door there had a chain with a lock that looked welded shut with rust. A broken pallet leaned against it. A shopping cart was on its side with one wheel missing. The ground near the dock had dark oil spots. I kept my engine on because I didn't want to stall out in this place. The idle made a steady hum that sounded too loud with everything else so quiet. I set the delivery bag on the passenger seat and cracked the lid to check for leaks. A little steam hit my hand, and it smelled like vinegar and pepper. I closed it tight and retied the handles. My dashboard notifications buzzed once with a weather alert I didn't read. I opened my glove box to see if I had a small flashlight, found only fuses and a tire gauge. I didn't step out. I didn't even take off my seatbelt. I cut the headlights for a second to see if any interior lights in the building were on. Sometimes you can catch a glow when your own lights are off. The dark swallowed everything and my eyes didn't adjust fast enough, so I clicked them back on and the wall jumped out of black. I looked up at the roof line and traced where power lines would normally connect. I followed the poles down the lane with my gaze and tried to find a line running into the building. I didn't see any. I stared a few more seconds, checking again from left to right, and then I sat there in my car trying to figure out if I had the wrong address. There were still no signs of any business operating there. No electrical lines running to the building that I could see. I called the number from the order, but it went straight to this automated message saying the number was no longer in service. I tried again right away to make sure I didn't press something wrong. Same recording. I sat there with the phone against my ear and watched my own headlights on the rusted door, and that mechanical voice kept repeating. That was bad. I should have just bailed, but I didn't want people at the restaurant to think I was flaky. I parked where my car would be visible from the street, under a busted pole light that still had the metal arm, no bulb. I set my hazards on. I called my dispatcher and told them the address looked dead and the number didn't work. Call me in 5, I said. If I don't answer, call the cops. My voice sounded steady. I put the call on the recent list and double-checked my battery. 71%. I grabbed the food from the passenger seat. I left the engine running and locked the doors with the second key fob I kept on a shoelace. The muffler droned low. I stepped out, felt the air colder by the dock. The pavement was gritty, and my shoes scraped. There was a stale smell like wet cardboard. I listened for any sounds from inside. It was quiet except for a drip somewhere and the soft shake of a loose gutter. I walked along the wall toward the corner, looking for a doorbell, a buzzer, anything. The paint curled away from the brick in long strips. Around the bend, there was a steel door with a deadbolt and a peephole, but the handle hung crooked and the lock looked painted over. I knocked with my knuckles and waited with the bag pressed against my thigh. No answer. I heard my own hazard lights clicking from the car, and it made the time feel slow. I took 2 more steps and knocked again, harder. A dry echo came back inside. I stood there another 10 seconds, then moved to the next bay. I walked around to what I thought might be the back entrance, but it was just another roll-up door that was obviously rusted shut. I stood there holding this bag of Chinese food, trying to angle my head to hear anything. That's when I saw movement in one of the upstairs windows. It was quick, just a gray shape sliding past the dirty glass. I froze. Then another shadow moved the other way. Then a third. Not dust, not my headlights. People. There were multiple people in that building, and they were watching me. I didn't raise the bag or call out. I took 1 step back, then another. I kept my shoulders loose to not show I was leaving fast. The window was a rectangle with old bars over it, and the glass was dim except where my lights made lines. One of the shadows moved closer, and I could make out a guy in a baseball cap. The brim was bent down, and he pressed his hand on the glass like he was blocking glare. He stayed there for 1 second longer than made sense if he didn't care. When he realized I'd spotted him, he stepped back into the darkness quickly. That was it for me. This was not a late shift. This was not a janitor. It was wrong. I scanned the other windows. There was a thin streak of light under one, like a phone moving and then stopping. I heard a faint scrape inside, metal on concrete, like something dragged. I started backing toward my car slower, keeping the bag steady so it wouldn't swing. I kept my eyes up at the windows and then down at the ground to not trip. My foot brushed a bolt on the pavement, and it rolled with a tiny clink that sounded loud to me. I didn't look away. I reached the corner of the building and the sightline to the window broke, and I picked up the pace by a fraction. I could feel the hot air from my idling engine before I saw the car. I hit the unlock on the second fob and heard the chirp. It was the smallest sound, but it felt like a flare going off in the quiet. I kept my face calm and didn't run. I lifted the bag to shield part of my face from the window out of habit, like it mattered. I got back to my car as casually as I could and threw the food in the passenger seat. I slid in, shut the door, and locked it all in one motion. I didn't look at the windows again. I put the car in drive. As I was pulling out of the parking lot, I could see flashlight beams moving around inside the building. Not steady light, but bouncing cones like people searching a floor. The beams whipped left and right, then stopped, then crossed. Whoever was in there was coordinating something. They didn't come outside. They didn't yell. They moved deeper into the building like they had a plan that didn't involve me being out in the open. I took the turn slow so the gravel didn't spit, then a little faster when the asphalt smoothed. I checked my mirrors. No cars behind me, no doors opening. The empty road ahead looked cleaner than when I came in. I kept my hazards off now, just normal headlights. My chest felt tight, but I focused on marks in the lane and the next stop sign. I drove 2 blocks and pulled into a small lot by a closed tire shop with cameras on the corners. I parked under a camera and made sure the lens pointed at me. I called my dispatcher back right away. When they answered, I spoke fast and clear, said I saw people inside and lights and no working number. They asked if I was okay. I said yes, I was leaving the area. They told me to come back to the restaurant and they would note it. I sat there 30 seconds to listen. I didn't hear engines, didn't see any headlights coming from the direction of that building. I pulled out and drove back along the main road. At the first red light, I checked the ticket for the 5th time. The name field was blank. The order was small, 2 items, 1 soup and 1 entree, paid by card. The tip was $2. It looked like a test, like someone placing just enough to get someone to come. I glanced at the time. It had been about 12 minutes since I told Dispatch 5. My phone buzzed with the scheduled callback. I answered and said I was in motion and fine. They said okay, and repeated to head in. I turned into the plaza, drove past the nail salon, and parked by the back door of the restaurant. The kitchen vents roared and the smell of oil hit me when I went inside. I told my boss and the other drivers what happened. They crowded the counter and kept it short because orders were bumping. Nobody rolled their eyes. One of the older drivers said, "Industrial Park? Backdoor note?" "Yeah." Another asked if anyone followed me. I said no. We pulled up the order history. The customers never called to complain about not getting their food. That was weird, because usually people start calling if their order is 15 minutes late. The phone on the wall stayed quiet. The ticket printer clicked for other orders, not that one. My boss wrote the address on a yellow sticky note and then typed it into the blacklist sheet on the office computer. He added the phone number too, with a note about the recording and the window silhouettes. He said to mark it, "Do not deliver." He looked me in the eye once just to make sure I was good. I nodded. He took the bag from me and set it on the prep counter. "Split it later," he said. We ate some of it between runs. The soup had cooled but was still okay. My coworkers started talking through what it could have been. One said it was probably a setup for robbery. Another said maybe they wanted to get a driver to walk inside while the second person circled around to the car. One guy pointed out how they stayed inside and moved with flashlights, like they didn't want cameras outside to catch faces. He said they were probably just going to jump whoever went past the dock door. All of it made sense. The more I thought about it, the more the details lined up in a bad way. The no service number, the empty lot, the guys in the window who didn't wave or open a door, the beams of light fanning like they were mapping a route. I took my next order to an apartment complex with buzzers and mailboxes and numbers I could read from the curb. I moved a little faster between doors. I checked mirrors more than usual. When the night ended, I put a note in my phone under the address so I wouldn't forget, and I deleted the route from my recent maps. I drove home on streets with traffic and lights. I realized how close I'd come to walking into a really bad situation. Two years ago, I was ending a toxic relationship with my boyfriend Mike, after finding out he'd been seeing other girls while keeping me as his backup. On my 29th birthday, I went to his place in the Bronx to say the last things I needed to say and leave. We sat at his little table. He lied, then apologized, then lied again. I kept my voice low and steady. I gave him his spare key and took mine back. The whole thing felt used up. It was close to 1:30 a.m. when I walked outside. The block was cold and empty, a shutter half down on the bodega, gray snow piled at the curb. I called a cab from the local number he always used. The dispatcher muttered something about 5 minutes. A gray Honda pulled up with a peeling base sticker in the rear window and a cracked taillight. I got in the back. The lock thunked heavy and final. The driver looked mid-40s, hair messy like he hadn't slept, beard shadow patchy. The seats were cracked vinyl with black tape patches. A pine tree air freshener hung off the mirror, faded and dusty. The heater rattled and blew lukewarm air that smelled like old smoke. "Queens?" he said without turning. I gave my address. He nodded and eased off the curb, the meter clicking awake with a tired beep. I buckled my belt and watched Mike's building slide by in the mirror. My phone showed 6%. I texted my roommate that I was on the way, then put the phone in my pocket to save it. The car's dash glowed weak green. The radio hissed with bass chatter I couldn't make out. We hit a row of lights on 3rd Avenue. He drove careful, 2 hands on the wheel, quiet. The city felt washed out. The windshield had a spider crack that caught the street lamps. The glove compartment door was scuffed white from knees. A half-empty water bottle rolled somewhere under his seat and thumped on bumps. I stared through the side glass. Cold air leaked around the window sill and brushed my cheek. I wasn't thinking about him. I was thinking about getting home, showering, and going to sleep. About 10 minutes into the ride, I realized he kept looking at me in the rear view. His eyes stayed a second too long before flicking forward. We were moving much slower than the flow, cars sliding past in the next lane while he sat in the far right. The engine hummed low like it was tired too. I checked the dash clock and felt the trip stretching. "Could we go a little faster?" I said. "I have work early." My voice sounded small in the rattling car. He smiled at the mirror, not at me. "Don't worry, I take care," he said. Then, like he'd been waiting, "You got nice eyes. You from Queens, yeah?" "Yes," I said. He let 2 cabs pass us before he eased on. The bridge ramp came up and he still floated under the limit. He glanced again. "We should get to know each other better," he said. "It's late. You don't have to go home." "No," I said. "Just take me home." He chuckled under his breath, like we were sharing a joke I didn't know. "You're playing hard to get," he said. "It's okay. You really want it." We rolled toward the toll. He popped the glove compartment while moving and rummaged with one hand. Paper maps, napkins, and old receipts slid forward. A crushed pack of cheap cigarettes fell into his lap. The car drifted, and the rumble strip buzzed under us before he jerked the wheel back. He muttered, still digging. The heater clicked on and off with each bump. "Please watch the road," I said. I kept my tone flat. My hands stayed in my coat pockets, one on my keys, one on my phone. I kept my eyes on the lane lines and the exit signs coming slow. "Relax," he said. He tilted the mirror to frame more of my face and smiled at the reflection. "You want a cigarette? We stop, we talk. I can make you feel better." "No," I said again. "Take me home." He kept pushing, like a script. "We go somewhere else," he said. "Motel, quiet. No questions." "I'm not going anywhere with you." He made a clicking sound with his tongue and shook his head. "Why so cold?" he said. "Come on, don't pretend. I like girls like you." After the toll, the road opened and traffic thinned, but he held the same lazy pace, as if he wanted the ride to never end. Frost dusted the guardrail. The river looked black and flat. He tapped the cigarette box against the steering wheel, tossed it back into the glove compartment, and left the door hanging open to bounce with the engine. He didn't fix it. Green signs slid by slow. I marked the distance to my exit and the number of lanes between us and it. The door's lock pin sat scratched and dull beside a child lock sticker half peeled. The window switch was worn to a shine. I was counting steps in my head. If the car stopped wrong, I would move fast. If it didn't, I would make noise. He went quiet for a minute, testing me. Then he started again, light and coaxing. "Birthday tonight?" he said. "I can tell. Pretty dress. You deserve a good night." I kept my eyes on the road ahead. "Take me home." His smile faded. "You are making this difficult," he said. Polite words with a flat tone. He lifted his hand to the mirror, adjusting it until the frame cut off everything but my eyes. He watched me through that, not the lane. A plastic soccer ball charm tapped the glass with each bump. He broke the quiet first. He said he wouldn't take me home until I was more friendly. My phone rang before I could answer him. The screen lit Mike's name. He must have heard my voicemail. I picked up and talked loud on purpose. "Yeah, I'm almost home," I said. "I'm at the bridge now, 20 minutes out. Same address as always, 4 on Avenue. The lights are on. They're waiting for me." I said it again, slower, so the driver heard every word. "They're at the door. Don't lock it. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The driver's jaw tightened. He stared at the road and didn't speak while I stayed on the line. I let Mike talk. Then I said, "Yeah, I'll call when I'm at the door," and hung up. The driver started muttering in his language under his breath. He shifted in his seat, pushed the mirror up, then down. He gripped the wheel at 10 and 2 so hard the leather creaked. For several minutes he didn't say anything else, just drove in a tight line, shoulders high. We came off the highway into local streets. Traffic lights stacked in a row ahead, empty lanes and cold sidewalks. He looked at the clock and exhaled sharp through his nose. His foot got heavy, then light, like he was arguing with himself. He glanced back again. "So we hang out a little," he said, voice trying to sound casual and failing. "They can wait." "No," I said. At the first red light he twisted in his seat to face me fully, one knee up against the steering wheel. He didn't care about the green arrow flashing for turn. Horns started behind us. "Don't be like this," he said. "I take care. 5 minutes." "Go," I said. "Light is green." I kept my shoulders square and my hands inside my coat. He snapped forward and hit the gas too hard, then braked at the next light. He looked back again. "You don't know what you miss," he said. His tone slid from sweet to hard. "Don't play with me." We rolled on. He started pleading in a low, fast voice. Then he switched. "I can leave you in the middle of nowhere," he said. "You want that?" "Take me home," I said. My voice didn't rise. I already paid the fare. He put his hand on the back of the passenger seat and turned around again at the next red. "Say please," he said. "Say sorry." Headlights washed the interior from the side. A delivery truck passed and the driver hit his horn at us. Mine lifted his chin like he didn't hear. Then he faced forward and drove, lips moving. The heater coughed. My exit came up, the block names familiar now. He slowed at each corner as if waiting for me to change my mind. He made a wrong turn, and then a U-turn slow enough for me to see the plate numbers on the cars nearby. I repeated my building number and he flinched like it hurt. When my street finally appeared, he drifted to the curb. The brakes squealed. He kept his hand on the shifter, not in park. He leaned half around again. "Last chance," he said. His eyes were empty of the smile now. I opened the door before he finished the sentence and stepped out fast, bag on shoulder, hand on keys. I didn't wait for change. Cold air bit my face. I slammed the door hard and started toward my entrance at a jog. His voice followed me down the sidewalk, something in a sharp, hissed tone, then, "You'll call me." I took the steps 2 at a time. The vestibule smelled like old paint and hot metal. I got the first door open with my key and pulled it shut behind me. In the small hall, I paused and listened. The street stayed quiet except for his idling engine. I climbed to my floor, unlocked my apartment, slipped inside, and turned the deadbolt twice. I didn't flip any lights. I moved through my rooms by muscle memory. I set my bag on the floor and went straight to the front window. The radiator ticked. I kept the curtains closed and stood to the side, looking through the gap between the panels. The gray Honda sat at the curb under the streetlight. His face was a pale shape behind the windshield. The car didn't move. He angled his head like he was counting floors. I waited. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike asking if I was inside. I didn't answer. I watched the stairwell window glow when a neighbor came in. I watched the Honda inch forward a car length, then back, like he was settling in. He was hunting for a light to betray the apartment. I stayed still and let my eyes adjust. The clock on my stove read 2:18 a.m. I stood there with my coat still on. Street salt crunched under a late plow. He kept waiting. Minutes spread slow. He lit a cigarette, the ember a hot dot in the car. He leaned forward and back, craning to look up the building's face. I moved never more than 2 inches from the curtain. I kept my phone ready and the police number typed in, thumb hovering, but I didn't hit call. A siren rose far away and faded. A cat crossed the street and disappeared between cars. The cigarette ember burned down and died. Finally, after almost an hour, the Honda's brake lights lit red. The car pulled away slow, paused at the corner, then turned and disappeared. I waited 5 more minutes. I let my shoulders drop, just a little. I locked the chain. I drank a glass of water in the dark. Then I turned one small lamp on in the kitchen, away from the front windows, and sat down. The next day, my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered on speaker. A man's voice filled my kitchen. "Finish what we started last night," he said. "Don't be a tease." I hung up and blocked the number. 2 hours later, another call from a different number. "Don't ignore me." I blocked that one too. I called the cab company and filed a complaint. The woman on the line said she would escalate it. She asked for the time, the car make, the partial plate, the route. I gave everything I had. For weeks, the calls kept coming, different numbers each time. Some rang once and cut off. Some went to voicemail with breathing and nothing else. A few left short messages in a fake sweet tone, and then the same hard voice under it. I kept blocking them. I saved the dates and times in a note because it felt like the right thing to do. After a while, they stopped. I never found out how he got my number. Maybe the dispatcher pulled it up. Maybe he saw it on the booking screen. I didn't know. I changed my phone number and sent the new one only to people I trusted. I started recording plates and driver names before I closed the door on any ride. I took pictures of the car, the sign on the dashboard, the base sticker on the rear window. If a driver made me uneasy, I got out before the first turn. I always sat behind the driver now, not diagonal. The cab company called me back once. The man said, "We took action," but he didn't say what. I asked if they suspended him or reported him. He repeated, "We took action," and thanked me for my patience. That was it. I didn't push. I just wrote down the time of that call and moved on. Now I plan my late trips differently. I text the plate to someone the second I get in. I leave a fake phone conversation open and I say my address out loud. I sit with one hand on the door handle at red lights. It's simple routines. They make the ride feel shorter. 2 years later, I still think about the cold glass under my fingers and the red coal of his cigarette, and how long that hour felt. I still think about how differently that night could have ended if Mike hadn't called when he did. It happened last winter when I was working as an administrator at this medical clinic downtown. I took the bus every day to avoid traffic and parking hassles after long shifts. Usually the ride was simple, 20 minutes from the clinic to my neighborhood. That evening snow fell and darkened. Inside the bus it was chaos, absolutely packed with commuters trying to get home. I had to push my way on and scan for any open seat. The only spot left was on a bench beside a really big guy, maybe 40. From the moment I sat, something felt wrong. The heater blasted and the windows were fogged except for finger streaks. Melted snow and black grit covered the floor around heavy boots. The driver kept tapping the brakes, that hard air hiss each stop. People stood hip to hip in the aisle, backpacks bumping shoulders and elbows. Beside him, his black parka looked new, and the knit cap was pulled low. Heavy work boots braced wide, his shoulders filled the seat. He smelled like cold air and cheap cologne with a hint of solvent. His hands were big and red, knuckles marked with small cuts. I faced forward quietly. I put my earbuds in and picked a simple playlist. I stared at the route map over the doors and counted stops. When the bus lurched forward, his thigh pressed into mine and stayed. I shifted a little away, but there was nowhere to go. The pressure did not change. The bench edge dug into my hip. A duffel blocked my foot. He curled his left hand over the back of the bench behind me. His fingers tapped slowly, boxing me in on that side. I set my bag upright like a barrier between our legs. He did not move. The driver announced a detour because of a wreck on the bridge. The bus groaned, turned, and the slide sent him hard into me. His hip pinned mine, and after the turn he did not pull back. I straightened, making space. He erased. A test. I looked at his profile in the fogged window as the bus rolled. The cap sat low, and his eyes angled toward the aisle, catching me. He was not smiling, and he was not talking to anyone. He sat steady like he had all night. Volume low. On purpose. Always. We passed the library plaza, and 2 people got off while 3 boarded. The aisle compressed, and a woman in a red scarf raised her elbow. I thought about standing and switching, but there was nowhere to land. If I stood, I would be pressed between bodies with him behind. He widened his legs until the side of his boot pushed mine. I nudged away and he mirrored it, returning to the same pressure. His sleeve brushed my shoulder and stayed there like a claim. I lifted shoulder and held my neck at an angle. My coat sleeves were damp. The bus stopped short, and someone yelled for the back door to open. The crowd shifted and air touched my neck. Then his arm came down again, closer this time, his cuff touching my hair. Not an accident. I lifted my head away, eyes on the ad. I stayed still. I raised my bag so the edge pressed hard between us. He let it sit for a moment, then widened his knees and it slipped. I pulled it back and tucked a strap under my forearm to hold. My phone flashed low battery, so I clicked dark and pocketed it. Snow blew sideways past the glass and stuck in tiny white stars. Stadium lights made the flakes look like dust across the street. The driver's radio crackled, and a kid in the back laughed once. I watched the snow and counted stops. The detour meant 10 more minutes. Not careless. The bus hit a pothole and jolted through the frame and seats. He did not brace with the pole. He let the jolt carry him. When I leaned away, he took the space like he had time. He breathed through his nose and warm air touched my cheek. Once. Only. A man in a suit moved toward the door and the woman shuffled. For a moment there was a gap near the rear door, then it filled. I stayed where I was and kept my face blank, hands steady. I did not want to show reaction or invite attention him. Even though the bench seats were wide enough for 2 people, he pressed. I had my earbuds in and tried to ignore him and stay calm. Every time the bus turned or stopped, he leaned into me more. I thought about getting up and moving, but the aisles were packed. There was literally nowhere else to go and nowhere to stand safely. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt and some patience. Maybe he did not realize. Maybe the crowd forced him into me. As the ride went on, it became clear none of that was true. His knee pressed and withdrew in a slow rhythm like he was timing me. I shifted my bag again and kept my shoulder raised to block contact. I checked the stop cord quickly and kept my eyes on the window. My music was low so I could hear breathing steady. Streetlights smeared across the glass as we crawled past another intersection. I kept my breathing even, eyes forward, mind on the next stop. He shifted just enough to make the bench creak and then went still. In the window, he was there at my side, heavy, quiet, patient, watching. Me. I stared at the smeared glass and kept still, because there was no space to move, and every small shift only gave him another excuse nearer. He kept glancing at me out of the corner of his eye, and I could feel him watching me even with my music on. When we got close to my stop, I started getting ready to push through the crowd. As soon as the bus stopped, I jumped up and forced my way toward the doors. There were a lot of people getting off at that stop, so I just followed the flow of passengers onto the sidewalk. I was relieved to be off that bus and away from that creepy guy. But then I noticed him getting off too, from the rear doors of the bus. He lit up a cigarette and just stood there by the bus stop, watching me as I walked away. Most of the other passengers got in their cars or headed in different directions, but this guy was clearly focused on me. I had to walk about 6 blocks to get home, and I kept looking back over my shoulder. The wind blew hard down the avenue and the snow hit sideways, stinging my face. Salt crunched under my boots, and the crosswalk paint shone wet under the lights. I kept my head down and held my bag tight to my ribs. I passed the pharmacy on the corner, and the lit windows showed shelves and a bored cashier. Behind me, the bus hissed once and pulled away. I glanced back again and saw him still by the sign, smoke curling up, body still. I turned onto my street and stayed in the main path where other feet had packed the snow. I did not take the usual shortcut through the small park, because the trees were dark and the path was icy. I watched the reflections in the storefront glass as I walked, and used them like mirrors to see behind me. My building was 6 short blocks, 3 traffic lights, 2 right turns. I counted them in my head and kept a steady pace, not slow, not fast. Streetlights hummed and wires rattled in the wind. For the first few blocks, he just stood there smoking and watching me. I was hoping he was just waiting for someone or had his own business in the area. But as soon as the crowd from the bus dispersed, he flicked away his cigarette and started walking in my direction. He was moving fast, much faster than a normal walking pace. I picked up my speed too, really starting to worry now. When I looked back again, I was shocked to see him actually running toward me. I had no idea what he wanted, but I knew it couldn't be anything good. I started running too, but he was bigger and faster than me. The next part happened so quickly I can barely remember the details. I cut across a shallow driveway and nearly slipped on the packed ridge by the curb. A delivery van rolled by slow, tires throwing slush, the driver staring straight ahead. I passed a laundromat with chairs stacked on tables and an out by 10 sign in the window. I kept to the light and avoided the alley between the laundromat and the closed nail salon. His footsteps hit hard and even, a solid beat that did not break. I tried to unlock my phone as I ran, but my gloves made the screen useless. I ripped one glove off with my teeth and jammed the phone in my pocket again. I crossed against a flashing hand and a horn blew. I raised a palm in apology and kept going. He took the same risk without slowing. I could hear his breathing now, steady and heavy, not like he was tired. I turned right by the corner grocery where crates of melting ice held bags of salt. A man with a shovel paused and looked at us, and then stepped back into his doorway. I aimed for the next light, hoping to hit a small group, but the sidewalk was empty. The snow made the city quieter than usual. I ran along a row of parked cars and tried to keep them between us, ducking around mirrors and bumpers. He cut wide to keep me in front of him. My apartment was around the next corner and up the block, but I did not want to lead him there. I veered one more street over to buy time and maybe find people. A bus shelter stood under a street lamp with a bench coated in frost. I slipped behind it and then back to the sidewalk, trying to slow him with the glass panels. He swung around them without touching, closing the gap like it was nothing. My lungs burned and sweat chilled my neck under the scarf. I could feel the distance shrinking with each step. He caught up with me and tackled me from behind, sending me sprawling onto the sidewalk. I remember hitting my head on the curb and everything going fuzzy. There was pain in my back and arms, and I could feel him pulling at my clothes. Later, the doctors told me he'd cut my jacket and shirt with a knife, but I don't remember seeing a weapon at the time. I must have lost consciousness, because the next thing I knew, I was in an ambulance. An elderly couple walking their dog had seen the attack and scared him off by yelling and running toward us. They called 911 and stayed with me until help arrived. The woman held my hand and kept telling me to breathe slow while the man kept the dog close and watched the street. I remember the dog's tags clinking together and the rubber smell of the oxygen mask. The paramedic asked my name and pressed a light in my eyes. My jacket was open and the lining was cut in 2 long slices from shoulder to hem. My shirt was slashed in the same lines and there were scrapes across my ribs where cold air hit skin. My head pounded where it met the curb and there was blood in my hair. The doors closed and the siren started, muffled inside the box. The woman's voice faded and the ceiling light slid by. At the hospital, they cut away the rest of the clothes and cleaned gravel out of my elbows and palms. They stitched a small cut in my scalp and wrapped my ribs. A police officer took a report at my bedside and asked for the route, the stop, the man's clothes, his height, if he said anything. He hadn't said a word to me the entire time. I told them the bus number and time, and pointed out the street corners on a map in the officer's notebook. They said they would pull camera footage from the bus and the intersections. I signed forms and gave my phone so they could copy the calls and texts around that hour. My neighbor came to pick me up because the nurses did not want me going home alone by a rideshare. We walked slowly out of the ER, past security and a floor cleaner pushing a machine that left wet tracks. Snow had slowed to a powder, and the plows had piled it along the curb in gray walls. The street where it happened still had a smear of disturbed snow near the gutter. The officer stopped there and bent to look for anything metal or sharp, but found nothing. Later, when they called me, they said the cameras were blurry and the route was too dark to get a plate or a face. The couple who helped me gave statements and described the same cap and coat I had. He had kept his head down and his collar up. They never caught him. I changed my commute, changed my hours, and changed my route to the clinic. I carried a small alarm and kept my keys threaded between my fingers when I walked. I took pictures of every street light that was out and sent them to the city. I checked over my shoulder at each corner and listened for boots on snow behind me. It was not dramatic. It was work, and I did it every day. Even now, I remember the sound of his steps more than his face. For months after that, I was terrified to take public transportation or even walk alone anywhere. Last year, my grandpa Frank was struggling after losing Grandma Ruth to cancer. He was 85 and had lived with her in their remote Colorado mountain house for over 50 years. After the funeral, Grandpa became increasingly isolated, barely leaving the property he'd built himself back in the 70s. The house sat 3 hours from town on winding mountain roads, surrounded by thick forest with the nearest neighbors over a mile away. My family was worried about his mental state, so my mom asked if I could spend a few weeks with him. I agreed, knowing how close we'd always been, and understanding how difficult the loneliness must be for him. I remembered the house well. A brown A-frame with a metal roof and a porch that wrapped halfway around. A gravel drive that cracked under tires. A tilted tin mailbox with faded numbers. The shed smelled like oil and sawdust. When I was a kid, Grandpa sharpened tools and let me hold the flashlight. After Ruth died, he stopped coming down to town. He told everyone he was fine. He kept his answers short on the phone. He said he was eating and sleeping. My mom kept trying to visit, but the timing never worked. My uncle said the place felt too quiet when he dropped off propane. He just said the air felt wrong. I pushed my own visit back because of shifts and bills. When I finally took time off, I made a list. Groceries, a carbon monoxide detector, batteries for flashlights, screws for the porch rail. I planned to check the gas stove, clear the downspouts, and clean the chimney screen. Normal things. I thought work would help him. The drive started before sunrise. I filled up at the last station and grabbed coffee. Two-lane blacktop turned to narrow switchbacks with dented guardrails. The forest got thicker. Patches of old snow hid in the shade, although it was late spring. A wooden sign full of bullet holes showed the county line. Clouds sat low on the ridge and the air smelled like sap. My tires slid once on loose gravel before catching again near the curve. Hard. The sky felt close. The last miles were slow. The road turned to dirt and rock. Dust followed the car. I saw the ridge and then the roof peak. The flag on the porch was bleached pink. The chimney leaned more than I remembered. The front windows looked like dark sunglasses. I pulled up by the steps and killed the engine. The silence sat heavy. When I arrived after the long drive up the mountain roads, I was shocked by how much Grandpa had changed. He opened the door with the chain on and stared at me through the narrow gap. His hair was thin and his face was hollow. He slid the chain free with shaking fingers and pulled me inside fast, like he was worried about letting the outside in. He hugged me and then looked past my shoulder at the driveway. He asked if anyone followed me. He locked the door again. The usually independent and confident man had become nervous and paranoid, constantly checking locks and refusing to stay alone even during the day. He walked the house in slow loops. He pressed on the deadbolt and jiggled the knob. He set a wooden bar into the track of the sliding door. He checked the tiny latches on the kitchen windows and twisted them until the metal squealed. He kept the blinds down. He asked me to shut the curtains before noon. He moved his chair so it did not face the front windows. I brought in groceries from the car, and he would not let me go alone. He stood in the doorway like a lookout while I carried bags. He flinched at the sound of rocks under my boots. He told me to park closer to the steps next time. He wanted the shortest path inside. He lowered the TV volume to a whisper and turned it off each time a car sound drifted up the road. He paused and stared, waiting for it to fade. It felt like a patrol. I tried small talk about chores and the weather, but he stayed on the locks. He asked if the back door latch looked straight. He asked if I saw any footprints near the shed. He asked if I noticed broken twigs by the fence line. He showed me a stick he had wedged in the track of the mudroom window. He said it made the window impossible to slide from outside. He checked it twice, pressing on the glass with his palm. When it was time for bed, he begged me to stay in his room because he was afraid to be by himself. This was completely unlike the fearless man I'd known my whole life. He used to sleep with windows open to hear owls and wind. Now he wanted them closed and locked. He asked me to push the dresser partway in front of the door. I rolled out a sleeping bag on the floor beside his bed. He kept the lamp on. He whispered, "You awake?" Every few minutes. I said yes. The clock moved slow. Grandpa told me that for months he'd been seeing a strange man who appeared at the edges of his property, usually early morning or at dusk. He spoke plain, like he was reading notes. The first time, by the aspens near the back fence, a still shape between white trunks. The second, by the old burn pile, where the ground was black and the grass stayed thin. The third, near the dry creek bed where rocks clack softly under boots. Each time, the man stood and watched the house. Dark jacket. Cap pulled low. The man never came close but was clearly watching the house, hiding behind trees and then disappearing when spotted. Grandpa also claimed he'd seen footprints in the snow around the house, and had once caught someone peering through the kitchen window. I assumed he was hallucinating from grief and isolation, but I was willing to stay as long as needed to help him feel better. For 2 weeks, I kept him company, sleeping in a chair by his bed. He was a deep sleeper normally, so I didn't think he'd notice if I stepped out for a few minutes. Around midnight one night, I decided to go to the kitchen to make tea. I moved slow and quiet, set the kettle, and watched the steam rise. I told myself I would be back in 2 minutes. I had my phone and the flashlight on the counter. The night felt steady. Then I heard a hard bang from the back of the house, like a bat hitting a wall, and my grandfather screamed my name. The mug rattled on the counter. I grabbed the flashlight and ran. My sock slid on the wood and I hit the door frame with my shoulder. He shouted my name again, higher than usual. He was upright in bed, gripping the headboard, staring at the window across from him. The window was gone. Glass covered the rug and blanket. A rock the size of a baseball sat on the sill. I put him in the chair by the dresser and threw a blanket over his shoulders. I taped a trash bag across the frame to slow the draft. The tape barely held on the cold wood. He kept his phone in his hand. "I'm going to check," I said. He nodded once. Outside, the cold bit. I walked the wall and swept the beams slow. Pine needles, dirt, glass. No tread marks, no heel prints. A scuff where the rock hit first. The rock had a stripe of red clay like the creek bed. I followed the wall to the shed. The padlock hung in place. I tugged it. Solid. I checked behind the propane tank, under the porch, around stacked lumber. I walked the fence to the back corner. I stepped in the dry creek and ran the light up and down. Smooth stones, an old can, a buried hubcap. No fresh scuffs, no broken branches. I went inside. I set the bar in the slider and checked the kitchen latch and the front deadbolt. I pulled the curtain and looked at the driveway. My car sat alone under dust. The mailbox leaned left like always. In the bedroom, I swept glass with a dustpan and a towel. The trash bag lifted and fell with each gust. We didn't sleep. I sat in the chair by the door with the flashlight across my knees and watched the hall until it turned gray. At first light, I walked the yard again. Same result. No tracks near the wall, no tires on the road, only my prints and a scuff from the day I arrived. The next day, we called the sheriff. A deputy came before noon. He photographed the sill, the rock, and the glass. He measured from the bed to the window. He pressed a finger into the dirt. Too dry for prints. He pointed out a gap in the trees where an ATV could roll in with the engine off. He asked if Grandpa had trouble with anyone. We had none. He asked about cash in the house. Only a little. He said there had been more vandalism that spring, mostly older homes far from neighbors. He said it was likely teenagers from town using forest trails. He promised more patrols, but said the county had few cars for many miles. He left a case number and told me to add lights and cameras. Grandpa didn't want to sleep there again. We packed his things over 2 days. Clothes, papers, a photo of Ruth, his shaving kit, a small toolbox. I locked the rifles in the safe and kept the key. We drove him to town and checked him into a small assisted living place near the clinic. He got a room with a window over a parking lot. He ate half a sandwich. Back at the ridge, I started repairs. I pulled the broken pane and scraped out old putty. I set a new pane, then screwed plywood over the outside while it cured. I tightened latches, drove longer screws into strike plates, and cut wooden rods for sliders. I mounted 2 battery motion lights, one by the steps and one by the shed. I bought 2 trail cameras and strapped one to a pine by the creek and one facing the driveway. I set date and time and sensitivity high. I walked past to test them. Each night I pulled the cards and checked the photos. I saw my back, a deer, a raccoon, Wind in the grass. No people, no machines. I slept on the couch with the flashlight on the table and the phone in my pocket. Twice the motion lights clicked on. I got up and scanned the yard. A rabbit twitched by the steps. The trees stayed still. On the last day, I shut off water to the outside spigot, unplugged small appliances, and set the thermostat low. I stacked the mail and left my number on the counter. I locked each door. I stood on the porch and watched the tree line. Nothing moved. I put the keys in my pocket and drove to town. We watched a baseball game in the common room. He asked if I fixed the window. I said yes. He said, "Good." He didn't ask about the man, and I didn't bring it up. I told him I would check the house again before I left. He nodded. That evening I drove back up to collect the cameras. I checked the cards in the kitchen. Squirrels. A deer. Wind in the grass. No one near the creek. No one on the drive. I locked up and stood on the porch 1 minute and listened. The ridge was quiet. The road dropped away in curves. I got in the car and rolled down the hill. I stayed another week to repair the window and secure the house, but never saw any sign of the mysterious watcher or experienced any more vandalism. When I was 19 and in my second year of college, I went to this end-of-semester party at my friend Derek's apartment. I'd only been legal to drink for about a month, so I was still pretty inexperienced with alcohol. By around 2 a.m. I was way too drunk to walk home, especially since I lived about 3 miles off campus. I called for a taxi using one of those ride apps, and it showed up after maybe 20 minutes. The driver was this middle-aged Asian guy with thick glasses, seemed pretty normal. Derek lived on the 3rd floor of a small brick building. Outside, the air was cold and wet. I watched the little car icon circle the block twice on my screen and waited by the curb, holding a parking sign to steady myself. He pulled up in a dark sedan with a plastic tag on the mirror. The back seat had rubber mats and a faint fruit smell. There was a crushed water bottle in the door pocket. He rolled down the passenger window and said my first name. I said yes. I got in, buckled up, and read my address off the app. He nodded, tapped his phone to start the trip, and eased out of the lot. The radio was low, talk voices under static. His phone with navigation sat on the console. My app showed 15 to 20 minutes. I dropped my backpack at my feet and pressed my knees against it. We went past the late-night pizza place and the laundromat with the gates pulled down. The streets were empty. He drove smooth, hands at 10 and 2. I knew the main route by heart. Maple, left at the pharmacy, past the park, then my street. He didn't talk at first. The tires hissed on the wet pavement. I breathed through my mouth and tried not to think about throwing up. I kept quiet and let him drive. At the next light, he glanced at me in the mirror. "Long night?" he asked. "End of semester," I said. He went through on green. The glow from the screen lit his glasses. He cleared his throat and said, "You look young. How old are you?" I said, 19. He nodded. "You live near campus?" I said, "Yeah, my own place." He asked if I worked or just school. I said just school. He said, "Good to focus." His voice stayed even. I watched the navigation line and tried to relax. We passed the pharmacy where we should have turned left. I watched the red sign slide by and shrink in the mirror. I leaned forward and said, "I think we missed that turn." He said, "My way is faster, less lights." He kept his speed the same and followed the curve past a closed car wash. On his screen, the blue line recalculated. I sat back. Maybe he knew a cut-through. I checked my app. The time estimate didn't change much. The fare still showed around 15. I didn't want to argue while drunk. I tried to keep track of where we were. He asked, "You live alone?" I said, "Yeah." He asked what floor. "Second." He asked if the building door locks. "Yes." As I answered, I realized he was collecting details. I kept my tone flat and stopped talking. We rolled past the park, but from a side I didn't use. The tall lights were off. The benches looked like shadows. I said, "My street is over there." He said, "Shortcut. Avoid traffic." He pointed ahead. The clock on his dash said it was later than I thought. At the next intersection, I saw the green sign for my street on the right. It slid past. I sat up and said, "That's my turn." He didn't slow. "Faster this way," he said, like he had said it before. He put on his signal late and took a different right, shallow and smooth. I watched his phone. The arrow moved. The line shifted, hesitated, then looped. The voice directions were muted. Only white arrows flashed. Every time he braked, the phone slid, and he steadied it without looking. I felt my own phone heavy in my pocket, but I kept it there. My head cleared as the ride went on. The streets looked darker. Trees leaned over the road. We passed houses with no cars in the driveways. A motion light came on as we went by 1 yard, then went dark again. None of it looked right. I said, "We should turn around. You keep missing it." He said, "I know this area. We go around and come in the back way." His tone didn't change. He kept his hands on the wheel and kept going. The radio drifted into static and back. We hit another intersection with an arrow sign for my street pointing left. He went straight. I pointed and said, "That's it. Left there." He held his line and said the same thing. "Better route. Avoiding lights. Faster this way." I watched his face in the mirror. No smile. No frown. The engine hummed. The car bumped over a seam in the road. He pushed his glasses up with one finger. Off to the left, the glow from the university towers floated over the trees. That meant we were skirting the edge, not cutting toward the center where I lived. The blue line on his phone stretched, then snapped back. We passed a shuttered strip of stores. One had bars on the windows. An ATM glowed behind glass. He made a right by a pawn shop and rolled down a block with no streetlights. I said, "You're adding time." He said, "Trust me." Another set of choices came up. The name of my street appeared on a green sign with an arrow pointing left. He kept straight and let it pass. He missed another turn and another one, each time using the same excuse about knowing a better route. We drove deeper into a part of town I never used. The shops thinned out. The signs switched to names I didn't recognize. The sidewalks were empty. We crossed under a low bridge with flaking paint and came into a grid of warehouses. Metal siding. Loading docks with chains across them. A few cameras mounted high but no lights on. I said, "This is wrong. My place isn't here." He slowed and looked at the phone like it had frozen. Then he turned into a narrow alley between two buildings. The walls were close and dented. Dumpsters sat crooked on broken wheels. He cut the engine. The radio died and the fan faded. I sat upright and grabbed my backpack straps. "What's wrong?" I asked. He reached back and put his hand on my shoulder, heavy and slow, like he was easing me down. "I'm tired. Need a break," he said. His fingers pressed into my hoodie. The car ticked as it cooled. I could hear a train horn somewhere far away. I smelled old oil and wet cardboard from the alley. I said we could stop at a gas station instead. He didn't move. His hand slid a little, then his palm opened against me. He started talking low, saying weird compliments and asking what I liked. It sounded like he had done this before. He kept one eye on the alley mouth in the rear window. He said, "You're safe with me," and moved his hand to my arm, then my side. I told him to please drive. My voice sounded thin. He kept talking and started touching me in ways that made it clear this wasn't a break. I tried to think about opening the door and running, but the alley was a dead end on one side and a wider street on the other. I didn't see anyone outside. I considered hitting him, but the front seats and console were a barrier. If he got angry, there was nowhere to go. He had the keys. The doors clicked locked when he parked. I felt the small button above the handle and tested it with my thumb. It didn't lift. He leaned back farther, arm coming over the seat now, saying it was okay, telling me not to be scared. He touched me again, and I froze. I didn't cry or yell. I was calculating. I kept my hands tight on the straps. I said, "Please stop." He didn't. He said, "We take a short break." His breath sounded normal, not rushed. He was comfortable. His phone started ringing. It was loud in the quiet car. He paused, hands still, head turning to the screen. The name lit the display. He stared at it for a second, then pulled his arm back and sat forward. "I have to take this," he said. He answered, put the phone to his ear, and spoke in a quick voice I hadn't heard yet. He said, "5 minutes, and I'm close, and yes, yes." He kept his eyes on the windshield while he talked. I fixed my hoodie and adjusted my backpack without making a big deal out of it. I took slow breaths. My mouth felt dry. He hung up and looked at me in the mirror. His tone shifted back to calm. "We continue another time," he said, like it was scheduled. I nodded once, slow. I said, "Okay," flat and empty. I made my face still. No challenge, no panic. He started the engine and unlocked the doors with a pop. He reversed out of the alley, turned, and drove like he had all night, steady speed, hands in the same position. We didn't talk. He followed the main road back toward the campus lights. We cut past the park and the pharmacy. He took the correct lefts without me asking. He pulled up in front of my building and stopped at the curb. The front lobby light glowed through the glass door. I unbuckled, opened the door, and got out fast without slamming it. He didn't say anything else. I closed it gently, stepped back, and watched his taillights go down the street until they turned and disappeared. I went inside, climbed the stairs, and locked my apartment door. I stood there with my backpack still on and listened to the quiet. I washed my hands, brushed my teeth, and sat on my bed. I didn't sleep much. In the morning, my head hurt, but not as bad as I expected. I made coffee and held the cup under my nose until the steam cleared my eyes. I picked up my phone and opened the app, then put it down and closed it. I found the taxi company number online and called the main line. A woman answered and asked how she could help. I said I wanted to report a driver. I gave his description, the car color, the plastic tag on the mirror, the thick glasses. I said he behaved inappropriately. She asked for my name. I said I wanted to stay anonymous. She said she would pass it on to a supervisor. I didn't give times or the alley location. I didn't say the worst parts. I hung up. I didn't know if it would go anywhere. I felt stupid for not getting the plate number. I checked my app for the receipt. It showed the fare and the car model, but not the full driver info because the trip never ended in the app. The status sat in a weird state, like it was still active. I closed it and uninstalled it. For weeks after, I replayed the route in my head. The wrong turns, the excuses, the flat tone when he said faster way. I mapped the warehouses on my walk home from class one day. The alley had a new tire mark in the puddles. I stood across the street for a minute and kept moving. I changed how I did nights out. I lined up rides before drinking. If lines fell through, I stayed over at whoever hosted. If I had to leave, I walked in groups. I started carrying a small keychain light. My phone stayed charged. I wore shoes I could run in. I kept a text draft open to send my location to a friend. I stopped telling drivers where I lived like it was casual info. If they asked about roommates or the building, I said friends were waiting inside, or I said I had a boyfriend coming down. I didn't joke with strangers about being young. No more telling my age to make small talk. Sometimes I would wake up at night and think I heard a car idling under my window. I would sit up, listen, and hear nothing. I kept the curtains closed. I asked the landlord to fix the front latch, and he did. The lock worked better after that. Small things. Practical things. A few times I almost told Derek. We were at a coffee place and he asked why I didn't want to grab a ride. My mouth opened and then closed. I said I just needed the walk. He nodded and let it go. People don't always ask questions when you don't offer details. That phone call saved me from whatever would have happened next. I don't know who it was. Maybe his dispatcher. Maybe another passenger waiting. Whoever it was, they pulled me out of that alley. I think about that when my phone rings. I answer more now, even if I don't want to. I know I should have pushed harder in the moment. I should have gotten out sooner. But I also know how it looked and felt inside that car. It wasn't a movie. It was a small space with one exit and someone with no hurry in his voice. I did what I could to leave without making it worse. After that, I didn't use taxi apps for a long time. If I had to, I triple-checked the route in the app and spoke up early and clear. I watched the turns. I learned the names of the streets around my place. I paid attention to signs and landmarks. That night taught me how fast normal can turn. It was just a party, then a ride, then a wrong turn, then an alley. Simple steps, clear details. I look for them now and act sooner. I don't hand strangers facts they don't need. It changed how I move through the world. Growing up in a Phoenix suburb, I was 7 years old and attended elementary school near the factory where my mom Linda worked. I lived with her in a small housing complex for plant workers, and usually she'd pick me up after school. Sometimes, though, I'd walk home with a group of neighborhood kids when she had to work overtime. The route took us through an industrial area with several vacant lots and abandoned warehouses. That spring day, Mom couldn't leave work early, so I was walking home with 3 high schoolers, twin brothers Danny and Keith, plus their friend Michelle. The sun was starting to set, but it was still fairly light outside. We left the school gate together and crossed cracked blacktop by the bent bike rack that squeaked. I held my backpack straps tight so they wouldn't slide. Danny and Keith joked about the baseball team. Michelle walked beside me, swinging keys with a purple tag. The air smelled like hot dust and machine oil from the plant. The path we used wasn't a real sidewalk. It ran behind low warehouses. We cut across a dirt lot with dry grass and half-buried cans. A shopping cart lay on its side with 2 wheels missing. A long cinder block wall showed faded graffiti. This was our normal route. Between buildings, the factory stacks pushed white steam that disappeared. I counted utility poles. 3, then a corner, then the lot with rebar. If we stayed on track, home was 15 minutes away. Mom said to go straight home and not stop. Michelle asked about the cat sticker on my backpack. I said book fair. Keith kicked a rock into a shallow metallic-smelling puddle. We passed a dented metal door with a peephole and heel marks high up. The farther from school we got, the quieter the buildings felt. The orange lamps hadn't turned on yet. Shadows stretched across dust. My shoes turned gray. The sun slid behind storage units. An electric panel buzzed on a pole. We crossed an empty loading dock with peeling yellow bumpers. Danny checked the street and waved us across. Michelle checked the time and said we were fine. A blue sedan sat with a foil sun visor. I noticed a cracked plastic fork and a spiraled shaving. I wasn't nervous. I was hungry and thinking about leftover rice and Mom's call. I matched my steps with Michelle's steady pace. We passed a chain-link gate with wire around the lock. A cardboard sign inside said, "Lease," in crooked red letters. The yard held gray pallets and a cracked white chair. A crushed orange soda can lay by the fence. Ants moved in and out. I looked down and then up to the road again. That was when I heard footsteps that weren't ours. At first, I thought our sounds bounced off empty buildings, but the timing was half a beat late. I glanced back and saw the gray wall and the blue car. Nobody close. I turned forward and kept with the group. We made the right turn by the cracked curb where weeds grew in a line. The roofs of our housing complex showed above the next block. We were almost there. Michelle tugged my sleeve and pointed at the sky. "Still light," she said. The twins kept a steady pace and scanned the cross street. My backpack felt heavy. I shifted the strap. I listened and walked. Partway home, we were joined by an unfamiliar man in his 30s wearing a worn denim jacket and carrying a backpack over his shoulder. Instead of passing our group like most pedestrians would, he stayed behind us at a short distance. At first, nobody paid much attention, but then Michelle noticed the man was staring specifically at me and her, the two youngest in the group. When Michelle whispered her concerns to the brothers, they looked back and felt something was wrong too. The man was walking too close and too slowly, even though his long legs should have let him move faster. Danny's posture changed. He moved to my side, so I was between him and Michelle. Keith fell back half a step to watch the man without stopping. We didn't run. We kept to the sidewalk and the painted curb line. The man's boots scuffed heel first, then toe. His backpack strap creaked when he adjusted it. I heard his breath sometimes, a short push through his nose, then quiet. When we passed the pallet yard, he closed the gap a few steps and then held it. Michelle squeezed my elbow once and kept her eyes forward. The twins stopped talking. Danny glanced at the next corner. The light over the warehouse door was off. The roll-up door had fresh scrapes under old paint. A shopping flyer tumbled and caught on Keith's shoe. He shook it off and looked back. The man looked away when Keith's eyes met his, then looked at me and at Michelle again. His cheeks were sunburned. His hair was short and flat. One cuff on his jacket was frayed. The backpack had a brand patch I didn't know. He didn't smile, and he didn't speak. We passed a storm drain. Wet concrete smell came up, old water and oil. Keith moved closer to the curb to make space on our left. The man shifted left too, mirroring without touching. Michelle slowed half a step to see if he would pass. He slowed too. His eyes stayed on me and on her, not on the street. "He's too close," Michelle said softly. Danny didn't answer. He lifted his chin and checked the cross street and the gate ahead. His hand brushed mine once, then fell. The lamps didn't come on. A car turned at the far end of the block and kept going. The man didn't react. His pace stayed matched to ours. I heard a small click of metal in his pocket when he stepped. We reached the corner where a white line was half worn off the asphalt. Danny stepped closer until his arm touched mine. Keith took the outside. Michelle tightened her grip on her keys so metal points stuck between her fingers. No one raised a voice. We moved together like a single piece, heads down, quick feet. The man adjusted his backpack and cleared his throat. Boots scuffed. I looked at the gray blocks of our housing roofs and counted. 1, 2, 3. We were still 2 blocks out. Behind me, the steps stayed right there, too close. Michelle leaned near my ear and said, "Stay next to me." I nodded once and kept walking. Heat pressed off the pavement and made my calves sticky. The wind pushed grit across the curb and into our shoes. The man's jaw worked like he was chewing nothing. He walked with his chin tucked, eyes tilted up at us. His denim looked stiff with dust along the seams. Michelle shifted the keys so one long one pointed out. Keith's shoulders squared, like he wanted to look taller. We angled slightly right to avoid a cracked section of walk. I could hear my breath in my ears, quick and small. The man's shadow stretched over our heels as the light thinned. We didn't break stride. Danny took my hand and suggested we pick up the pace. We turned onto the narrow path between two warehouses we used almost every day. The ground there was packed dirt with bottle caps pressed into it. A row of busted windows faced us, dark like missing teeth. The air felt cooler in the shade. Our steps sounded different there, hollow and close. I hoped the man would break off at the corner and go the other way. He didn't. He came after us into the alley and kept the same slow pace, still close. I could hear the zipper pull on his backpack tapping plastic. I stared at a strip of caution tape stuck to a post and tried to keep my feet moving straight. Then his steps changed. He pushed faster. The gap closed in 3 long strides, and the breath from him sounded wet and hard. Keith spun, eyes wide, and his voice cracked. "Run!" he shouted. I saw a quick bright line in the man's hand. It looked like metal. He lifted it waist high. We all moved at once. Keith grabbed Danny's sleeve, then let go. The twins cut to the right, hard, aiming for the main road where there was traffic and light. Michelle veered left toward the rows of small houses, keys in her fist. Danny pulled my shoulder and we angled straight for the factory gate. We knew there was a guard there and cameras. Gravel slid under my shoes. I almost fell but kept going. The man didn't charge after any of us right away. He stopped like he had to pick. He turned his head from the twins to me to Michelle, then looked at the broken door of the abandoned warehouse. He stepped to it, slipped through a gap in the plywood, and vanished inside. We ran until the path ended at the street and then cut toward the plant. My lungs burned and my backpack thumped. I didn't look back because Danny told me not to. At the corner, a semi rumbled by, shaking the air. We waited for it to pass and then sprinted across. My shoelace slapped my ankle and then came loose. I didn't stop. The guard shack window came into view, glass reflecting orange sky. Danny waved both arms. "Help!" he said, breath broken up. The guard inside stood fast, opened the door, and stepped out with one hand up to stop traffic. He looked past us first, scanning the road. We reached him and bent over, hands on knees. I could taste metal in my mouth. The guard put a hand on my shoulder, then guided us inside. The cooled air smelled like coffee and paper. He picked up a phone and punched a button. Within minutes, Keith pushed through the door with his face pale and sweat dark on his shirt. He kept looking over his shoulder. Danny pulled me onto the stool by the wall. Michelle showed up a few minutes later, breathing hard, hair stuck to her neck, one knee scraped. She closed the door and leaned on it. The guard asked short questions. Where? What did he look like? What was in his hand? Keith said, "Knife." Michelle said, "Maybe a screwdriver." Danny said he wasn't sure. The guard said not to open the door for anyone and called the police. He called inside the plant and told someone to check for my mom. He locked the door. We waited like that, quiet, while his radio hissed. I watched the small wall clock. The second hand jerked around. 20 minutes felt like a long time, but we counted them out. Cars idled at the gate and then moved. The guard took names and wrote quick notes. He asked what color the jacket was. "Denim," Keith said. He asked about shoes. "Boots," Michelle said. He asked if the man said anything. We all shook our heads. 2 patrol cars rolled up with lights on but no siren. 2 officers came in and 1 stayed by the door. They asked us to go through it again. Keith insisted the glint was a blade. Michelle pointed to her scrape and said she cut across gravel because he lunged. Danny said he saw the man's hand but not the shape. The officer took our statements down, line by line. He asked about the warehouse. We told him which one. Another unit went that way. The radio on his shoulder crackled with codes. In the middle of it, my mom came into the guardhouse still in her work goggles and hairnet. She pulled the goggles up and came to me fast. She checked my arms and my face like counting. She looked at the officers, then at the guard. She asked if anyone was hurt. The guard said no. The officer said we did the right thing. Mom squeezed my shoulder and nodded once. They kept asking for small details. Height, hair, age, accent, if any. None of us remembered any words from the man because he never spoke. The officer's pen paused. He asked if anyone saw a tattoo. I said I saw frayed fabric on his cuff. Michelle said the backpack had a square patch. Keith repeated, I saw metal. An officer on the radio said the abandoned building was empty. The door had fresh pry marks. Nobody inside. They checked the lot and the loading dock and the stairwell. Nothing. The officer told us they would keep patrols near the school for a while and call if they found someone. He said it could be a drug addict looking for an easy chance. He said sometimes people off their meds walk and follow. He didn't promise anything. He gave the guard a card. Mom signed something and took my hand. We stepped out into the warm air. She kept me close as we crossed the lot. My legs felt shaky, but I could walk. Behind us, the red and blue lights shut off. The guard nodded when we passed and told us to be careful. Mom thanked him. We drove home with the windows up. I watched the chain-link fence slide past and the gray blocks of the warehouses. Nothing moved near the boarded door. At the apartment, she locked both deadbolts and checked them again. She called a neighbor with kids and told her to spread the word. The phone rang for a while that night. I sat at the table and ate rice with a spoon while Mom stood with the phone to her ear. I heard the word police repeated, and knife, and warehouse. I went to bed early. Every sound in the complex sounded like steps. I stayed awake and watched the light under the door until it went out. The next morning, parents clustered at the school gate. Factory workers walked their kids in work boots and reflective vests. Moms took turns standing at the corner near the alley. Michelle's mom held a clipboard and wrote down groups and times. The twins' dad waited at his truck with the hood up, arms crossed, ready to drive and follow. The school talked to the city and sent a note home. The route by the warehouses was discouraged. The police car cruised by twice between bells. We didn't take the old path anymore. After that day, I never walked home only with kids. There was always an adult or a car. It stayed that way through the rest of that school year. The man was not caught. A few weeks later, people in other neighborhoods said a guy in a denim jacket was seen near a corner store and outside a laundromat watching kids. Some stories had a knife. Some just said he stared and left. Cops came and went. Nothing solid came from it. Our complex had a new lock on the back gate. The abandoned warehouse got new boards and a chain. Summer came early. We moved from shade to shade like everyone else. I still looked over my shoulder near the long walls. It felt like he had burned a shape into those blocks. I've thought about what we told the police. I wish I remembered the patch brand. I wish I counted eye color or the scars or something that made him different from another man in a jacket. We were kids, and we ran. That was all. Even now, I try to look up when I walk. I try to count what matters. When my own kids ask to go to the store alone, I say no. I drive them or walk them. I stand at the corner and watch until they are inside. I still see that quick flash of metal in the sun, and the way he didn't pick us, or maybe picked something else first. I'm glad we ran toward the guard and toward my mom. I keep the doors locked and the keys in the same place. I remember that narrow path between the warehouses, and I don't go there. About 6 months ago, me and my roommate Amanda were living in this apartment complex in Houston. The area had been getting more dangerous lately, so we'd installed a video doorbell and electronic locks for security. It wasn't a fancy building. Beige carpets in the halls, chipped paint on the stair rails, a laundry room that ate quarters. At night, the parking lot felt empty and loud at the same time. You could hear cars on the feeder road, and sometimes a shout from the bus stop. We kept our heads down, keys ready, in by dark. Across the hall was a family with 2 kids. They'd been there for years, very quiet, always holding the elevator for us, always a good evening, and then their door closing soft. One Saturday, we saw a moving truck out front and the dad carrying out a crib. The unit went empty after that. The hall felt different. I don't know how to explain it. Their kids' drawings came off the door, and there was just a blank peephole staring at ours. When they moved out, we were curious about who would replace them. A week later, we found out. The new guy, Kevin, was probably around 30, worked in tech, and seemed to live alone. He had a short beard and a faded hoodie and spoke fast, like his brain was still on a call. When he was moving in, we couldn't believe the amount of stuff he was bringing up the stairs. Boxes and boxes of collectibles, comic books, gaming equipment, action figures. It looked like he was trying to fit a whole store into a 1-bedroom apartment. He had a U-Haul blocking 2 spots and a dolly that banged each step. The boxes were labeled with marker: slabs, sealed, PC parts, manga. A framed poster slipped from a stack and he caught it with his knee. "All good," he said, breathing hard, and gave us a quick smile. We held the fire door as he pushed the dolly past. Inside his unit we could see stacks on stacks, a black steel shelf half-built, and a folding table covered in bubble wrap. He told us he worked remote for some cloud company, and that most of the boxes were inventory. We nodded, said welcome, and went back to our side. That first week was just noise and tape. The doorbell kept pinging motion detected, and sometimes it was only the shadow of the dolly through the peephole light. Once at 1 a.m., we heard him dragging something heavy, like a case on carpet. We didn't complain. People move at weird times in Houston, especially when it's cooler. Down in the lot, we saw him loading more boxes from the truck to his sedan, and then returning the truck before dawn. He waved. We waved back and went inside. Amanda said we should be good neighbors. I agreed. Our floor was mostly quiet, and it felt right to set a tone early. We put together a welcome basket with homemade cookies, coffee, and some household basics. Paper towels, dish soap, a note with our numbers. We knocked on his door a few days after he'd settled in and introduced ourselves. When he opened, warm air came out with a smell like plastic and cinnamon. There were more boxes now, stacked to the ceiling in clean columns, a narrow path to the kitchen, a folding chair in the middle like a checkpoint. He looked surprised, and then really happy. He seemed really grateful, maybe a little too grateful, but we figured he was just being polite. He kept thanking us. "You guys are awesome, seriously. This building needed energy." He said that 2 different times. He asked where we worked and if we were from Houston originally, and if the management was cool. He touched his hair a lot, like he was getting ready for a photo. We didn't go in. We stood in the doorway and did that hallway talk neighbors do. After a minute, I said we had to go because I had rice on the stove. He laughed like that was the funniest thing he'd heard that day and said he'd bring the basket back tomorrow. That's when his behavior started changing. At first, it was small things. He'd always seemed to be leaving his apartment right when we were coming or going, wanting to chat in the hallway. It started with timing that felt like coincidence. Monday morning, we stepped out with gym bags, and his latch clicked, and his door opened like he'd been standing there waiting. He asked about the gym nearby and how crowded it got before work. We kept the answers short, nodded, and took the stairs. 2 days later, it happened again. We came back with groceries, and the second we set bags down to unlock our door, Kevin's door opened. He leaned on the frame like he was stretching his back and told us about some new security update that made his phone unlock slower. He asked if our door lock ever lagged. I said not really. He laughed again, same big laugh, and pointed at our video doorbell and said, "Great hardware." Then he watched us go inside and only closed his own door after ours clicked shut. He started coming over every few days asking to borrow things. Detergent, AAA batteries, a screwdriver, a tape measure, glass cleaner. He'd smile and talk like it was a favor to him to return stuff fast. Sometimes it was the same day, sometimes a day later, wrapped in a paper towel with a sticky note that said, "Thanks." We kept a little bowl by the door so we didn't have to hunt. Sometimes he'd ask if we could watch his cat while he ran errands. He left the key under a dish and wrote feeding times. We peeked in, filled bowl, left. He thanked us. None of it seemed that weird at first. But over the past few weeks, things had gotten much more intense. We went out to some clubs downtown and came home around 4 a.m. to find Kevin sitting on the stairwell waiting for us. He was on the second step, elbows on his knees, hood up, a plastic grocery bag by his foot. He stood when he saw us and moved into the landing like he was a bouncer. He was upset, asking where we'd been and saying we should let him know if we're planning to stay out past midnight. His words came fast and clipped. He kept glancing at our door like it was his. I laughed because it sounded ridiculous at that hour. He stared at me like I had broken a rule. Then he called me a stupid blonde and demanded access to our security camera feed. He said it was for our own safety, that the building wasn't secure enough, that our doorbell angle missed the stairwell, that he could integrate our camera with his. Amanda said, "No." I said, "Good night." He stepped closer and said, "You're making this harder." We told him he was crazy and went into our apartment. We locked the door and turned the deadbolt until it clicked twice. The next morning, we checked our doorbell camera footage and saw that Kevin had sat outside our door for the rest of the night, just watching and waiting. He slid down the wall under the exit sign and stared at our peephole. He scrolled on his phone. He stood up and leaned close to our peephole like he could look inside. At one point, he took a folded blanket out of the grocery bag and spread it on the carpet right against the threshold. At 6:11 a.m., he finally went back into his apartment. We reported the incident to building management, and they said to call the police. The office had a humming vending machine and a stack of old flyers. The manager, Lydia, listened while typing and said she'd make a note. She said hallways were common areas, and they couldn't evict someone for sitting there. She told us to call 911 if he tried to block our door. The police at the desk said they couldn't do anything unless he made specific threats or actually entered our apartment. The officer told us to save everything, get case numbers, and avoid contact. Management must have talked to him because he left us alone for about a week after that. The hallway was quiet again. We timed our exits. We carried pepper spray and kept our bags zipped. Then the real stalking started. It was subtle at first. Kevin would position himself in the hallway whenever he heard us moving. The vents carried every sound. Our deadbolt had a small metallic clack when it turned. He learned it. Amanda started leaving for work an hour early to avoid him. She wore trainers and changed at her desk so she could move fast down the stairs. I couldn't leave during the day without finding him lurking by the elevators or the stairwell. He'd lean on the railing like he was stretching a calf muscle that never finished stretching. He'd follow me to my car, to the mailbox, even to the laundry room. He kept 3 feet back and didn't touch me, but he stayed right there, matching my speed. In the laundry room, he stood between the Coke machine and the folding table and asked what unit used the strong detergent. I didn't answer. I folded towels, closed the basket, and walked out. He followed until our doors faced each other again. It felt like he was monitoring our every movement. If I paused on the landing to find my keys, his door opened a crack. If our knob turned at noon, his peephole went dark. He carried a small notebook now, cheap black cover, pen tucked in the spiral. Sometimes he lifted it and wrote a line while looking at our shoes. I started leaving with my phone camera open and my thumb over record. I varied my schedule by 30 minutes. I took a different stairwell. He adjusted. He was always there. The love letters started showing up everywhere. On our door, under our windshield wipers, stuffed in our mailbox. Printer paper, black ink, too many lines per page. At the top, he wrote my name in big block letters. Then paragraphs about fate, neighbors, sinking routines, safety. One note said I walked with purpose and would be a good partner in emergencies. Another was a list of things he thought I liked. Almond milk, blue shoes, 24-hour grocery stores, mint gum. He underlined overcast mornings. He was wrong about half of it. He kept leaving more. When I finally told him directly that I wasn't interested in any kind of relationship, he lost it. It happened in the garage by the column with a peeling 3C sticker. He stepped out between 2 cars so fast I almost dropped my keys. I said, "Kevin, stop. I'm not interested. Leave me alone." He stared like he was trying to read my face. Then he said if I wouldn't go out with him, he'd kill me and then kill himself. He didn't raise his voice. He said it like a plan. He stood there waiting for me to answer. I didn't. I walked around him, got in my car, and drove to the leasing office. Of course he said it when Amanda wasn't around and I didn't have my phone recording, so I couldn't prove it to the police. I wrote down the exact time, date, and spot. We called the non-emergency line and gave the details. The officer told us to keep documenting, consider a protective order, and call 911 if he showed up outside our door again. He said, "Without a recording, it's tough." I printed that note and taped it inside our kitchen cabinet next to our list of case numbers. Kevin installed his own security camera pointed at our door so he could track when we came and went. A small black square stuck to the wall with adhesive, angling down toward our mat. It blinked when it detected movement. I filmed it, sent the clip to management, and got an auto reply. When we weren't home, he'd slip disturbing sexual notes under our door or leave them on our cars. One was folded into a heart and slid under the mat with our names written on each side. Another was under my wiper, soggy from morning dew. Ink bled into the paper like bruises. I started wearing a hoodie in the building and keeping my head down. In the hall, his door was always a little open, chains stretched tight. He watched the slice of floor between our units. He timed the elevator door. He learned the mail carrier's schedule. He began humming when we walked by, the same 3 notes over and over. He stood still whenever he heard Amanda, but he followed me. Small things went missing from the laundry room. 2 baskets, a bottle of bleach, and turned up neatly stacked beside his door like trophies. I took photos of everything. The building management said their hands were tied unless he actually broke into our apartment. Lydia repeated that line with the same calm face. She sent an email with a paragraph about tenant disputes and documenting concerns. She suggested we swap units at renewal. We started looking into breaking our lease, but the penalties were huge and we couldn't afford to move right away. When I was 17, I went with my dad to our family cabin in the Vermont mountains during February to check on the property after heavy snowstorms. We usually went there in summer for fishing and long days on the dock, but this time he needed to grab some tools and see if the roof or the pipes took a hit. It wasn't a vacation. He said we'd be in and out if everything looked fine. The drive from Boston was slow and ugly. Normally it took 4 hours. That night it dragged to 7. Wind pushed at the car. Wipers scraped over ice and smeared slush across the glass. Trucks threw salt. By the time we got off the interstate and onto the state roads, the snow finally stopped. It was after midnight. The sky looked washed out from porch lights on drifted snow. No other cars, no footprints on the sidewalks of the little villages we passed. We didn't stop. Our cabin sat on a narrow lake at the end of a dirt road. The place was part of a small community, maybe 30 houses, most with shutters closed from October to May. In winter, the area felt empty. The nearest year-round neighbor was a half-mile down. In February, you heard nothing. As we got closer, the road narrowed with banks higher than the hood. Branches bent under weight. Dad kept the heater low so the windshield wouldn't fog, and the vents gave off that dusty smell from not being used in months. We crossed the small bridge over the creek that fed the lake. The guardrail was half buried, only the top rail showing like a line through the snow. The mailbox clusters for the seasonal places were domes. There were no fresh plow cuts. Dad's hands were tight on the wheel. He didn't talk much. I knew he was running through a list. Shut off the main valve, check the breaker panel, look for ice dams on the eaves, grab the toolbox and the old auger under the bench. I nodded and kept my eyes on the road. We passed the Miller place on the highway turnoff. Their porch light was dark. In summer, they were always the last to leave. The lake would be solid from bank to bank. Not tonight. The last mile to our road always felt longer than it should. The tires hummed over packed snow. We crept past the old green sign for the camp association, half covered. Our headlights picked out the same things I remembered. Stone walls, iron well caps, a split rail fence broken in 2 places. I checked my phone for a bar. Nothing. No service along the lake in winter. Dad mentioned we'd have to shovel a path to the door before anything else. He had 2 pairs of gloves and handed me one without taking his eyes off the lane. We rolled past the last cottage before our turn. Its driveway was a clean white ramp. No cut from a plow, no footprints. The porch steps were invisible. The wreath from December still hung on a nail, frozen flat. Our turnoff was a few hundred yards ahead. A right that dipped downhill, ran along the pines, and ended at the shore. When we reached it, Dad downshifted and eased the car in. The lane hadn't been plowed. That was expected after a storm like that. But the surface wasn't untouched. 2 dark lines cut straight down the middle of the snow. Fresh tire tracks. The edges were crisp, not rounded by wind. I leaned forward, following them with my eyes as they disappeared around the bend. Probably the Millers came up for the weekend, Dad said. His voice didn't change. He knew they sometimes visited to ice fish or check their lines after a freeze. It made sense, and it didn't. Their place was back the other way. We crawled along at a walking pace. The car's nose pushed light powder into a low wave. The tracks kept going. I watched for boot prints stepping off, any signs someone had gotten out. There were none. No marks on the banks where someone shoveled, just the two lines. The bend tightened. On the inside, spruce trunks crowded close, needles with rims of ice. On the outside, the hill fell away toward the lake, a soft roll down into black. We didn't see the water, only the empty. The high beams made the snow look like vapor. We rounded the curve, and our headlights swept over a shape tucked between the trees. Dark blue, coated with white on the roof and hood. An SUV parked off to the side where the shoulder widened a little. It sat nose out, angled so it was hard to see it from the lane unless you were right on it. Strange, Dad muttered, and took his foot off the gas so we drifted past. The engine idled loud in the quiet. I looked for exhaust from the SUV, for a tailpipe plume in the beam. But the cold made every breath look like smoke, and the road haze messed with depth. The windshield creaked where ice on the wiper had frozen again. I could hear my jacket sleeve swish when I moved my arm. We inched by. The tracks we'd been following lined up with the tires on the SUV, then continued on ahead toward the end of the lane. Dad kept the wheel straight and didn't say anything else. His knuckles looked pale on the steering wheel, and the dashboard clock clicked its seconds in the quiet. Cold air leaked around the door seals and settled on my legs like a towel. We were almost past the SUV. The trees were close enough on my side that branches tapped the mirror. I turned in my seat and looked back. In the dim glow of our taillights, I could make out the silhouettes of two people in the front seats of the SUV. I told my dad what I saw. I said 2 people in the SUV. He didn't look back. He said, "Maybe they're stuck or lost. Roads are bad." He nudged the car forward and followed the tracks. I kept watching the mirror until the blue shape disappeared behind trees. We reached our driveway. The plow berm was high, packed like concrete, but the fresh tracks had pushed through earlier and made a cut. Dad eased in and stopped short of the porch steps. The house was dark and square against the snow. No curtains. You could see straight through the front windows to the stairs, and the sofa, and the hall mirror. It bothered me more now that I knew strangers were close. We turned off the engine and the world got quiet again. No wind, no motors. The tick of hot metal cooling. We didn't talk much. We got to work. We shoveled to the door, scraping down to the old planks. The porch groaned. Snow dust got into my gloves. The lock turned easy. The air inside smelled like cold wood and ash. We went through our usual steps. We kept our boots on. Dad flipped breakers. I opened cabinet doors so pipes could warm up. He checked the main valve in the crawl. I set down the bags by the bench. I kept looking at the glass. The black panes reflected us like someone else standing outside. Dad said, "We'll be quick in the morning." He meant grab the tools and go. I nodded. I didn't want to sleep in my first floor room. That room faced the front with a big window, no blinds. Anyone standing in the yard could watch me breathe. I said, "Can I take the upstairs guest?" He raised his eyebrows. Then he said, "Sure," like it was nothing. He didn't ask why. While we unloaded the trunk, I kept glancing down the road. Headlights never came. No sound of another engine. The tracks from the lane stopped at our cut and went past to the turnaround at the end. I started feeling like someone was tucked into the dark, waiting for the lights to go off. It was a steady, physical thing, like a weight between my shoulder blades. Inside, the heat started to creep back. Radiators clicked. We kept the living room lamp and the kitchen light on. It made the windows look like TV screens. We ate quick from a paper bag. Chips and a soda. Dad checked the deadbolt and the back door, then took his bag to the master room. He said he was wiped. He said we'd hit it early. I stayed up. I told myself I'd read a bit and then go upstairs. I took a chair by the fireplace. The firebox was empty and cold, but the chair was soft and the lamp was good enough. I flipped open a paperback. I didn't get far. It felt like the air changed. Not colder, just aware. The same feeling as when a teacher stands behind you during a test. I lifted my eyes without moving my head. The window facing the lake was a rectangle of weak light. The snow outside reflected the lamp like a pale film. At first, I thought it was just the shape of the old dock posts. Then I saw a shoulder edge away from the trunk and lean in. Two figures stood at the edge of our property, near the path to the dock. One a little taller than the other. They were trying to see inside. They stood behind trees and shifted to find a better angle. I put the book down and stood up fast. The chair springs squeaked. The figures moved. Not running. They slid back into the shadow behind the pine, and then I couldn't see them. I stepped to the side to change my own angle. Nothing. Just the black and the lake ice. I went straight to my dad's room and knocked. I kept it low and steady. He woke and came to the door. I said, "Someone outside." He followed me without questions. We stood shoulder to shoulder at the lake window and looked. The yard was empty. The dock was a white line. The cedar by the path held its snow like a shelf. Dad didn't say anything. He went for the flashlight, but he didn't open the door. He held the beam low and swept it across the glass to kill the reflection, the way you do when you want your eyes to adjust. The beam picked up marks in the snow, footprints, 2 separate sets. They came from the road, crossed the yard in a diagonal, and stopped by a cluster of trees near the dock. Then they returned the same way, back toward the lane. We watched until our eyes watered. No movement. He clicked off the light. We walked to the front room window. Same thing there. 2 sets of prints came up to the edge of the porch and then went back. The prints had good edges. Fresh. Dad locked everything again even though it was already locked. He turned on every exterior light. The porch light, the back flood over the woodpile, the small lamp over the side door. The snow glowed flat. He didn't go out. He said, "We stay inside." It was the right call. There was no reason to give someone our position in the yard. We kept the lights on and stayed in the living room. I took the chair. He sat near the door with his jacket on. We didn't say much. The house creaked when the heat cycled. Every so often he stood up and looked out, then sat again. Hours felt long. The clock on the wall sounded louder than usual. Sometime after that, we tried to sleep. He told me to take the upstairs guest like I planned. I went up with my bag, shut the door, and left the lamp on. The guest room window faced the road but high enough that no one could look in without standing in a drift. I lay in my clothes. I listened for steps on the snow crust. I must have dozed in pieces. Morning came clean and blue, the kind of light that makes everything look flat. We dressed and went outside right away. The cold bit inside my nose. Our breath hung. The yard was a page full of lines. Prints from 2 pairs of boots, easy to track. They weren't random. They came up from the lane, checked the front, went to the side of the house, circled the living room window, then out toward the dock and back to the road. We followed them along the lane. They didn't just visit us. The prints cut into other driveways. At the cabin, 3 lots down, the prints went to the back door. The paint around the knob was scratched up, like someone worked a tool there. Another place had marks on the window screen. The metal was bent away at one corner. It looked like they started and then stopped. We kept moving. Every few houses, the same thing. Tracks up, circle the windows, test a door or a low window, then back to the lane. In places the snow had drifted over and softened edges, but you could still read it. They were scouting. They had time in the night to make a map. Back at our place, we took pictures on Dad's phone, and then he called the local police from the landline. No cell service. He gave the address and said there were footprints and damage on some neighbors' doors. The officer on the phone asked us to stay inside and not disturb anything else. He said a deputy would drive out after the plows made a pass. The deputy came around late morning in a black SUV with a light bar. He walked the prints with us, took his own pictures, and wrote in a small notebook. He was direct. He said there had been an uptick in thefts from vacant houses on the lake this winter. Tools, generators, fuel cans, even copper pipe if they could get to it. He said cold nights mean fewer people outside, fewer witnesses. He studied our windows and the open view and frowned. He said the thieves were probably looking for the best targets and for routines. He said they might not have realized we were staying. I pointed to our car and the lights. He nodded. He agreed it should have told them to skip us. He said, "Sometimes they push it anyway. See who comes to the door." Dad asked about the dark blue SUV we saw on the bend. The deputy went that way and checked the turnouts. By then, the road had a new plow cut and fresh traffic. No vehicle. He said he would note it. He took our statement and told us to be careful, to keep lights on and doors locked. We packed our tools fast after that. Dad said we would head back to Boston after lunch. We did a last walk around the house. He shut off the main again. I hauled the bags to the car. We both took one more look at the tree line and the lane. Police never found the owners of the blue SUV, and I still wonder about the true intentions of those nighttime visitors. During the summer of 2019, when I was 15, me and my buddy Jason used to hang out at this old railroad bridge that crossed the river outside our town. Trains hadn't used those tracks in probably 10 years, but the bridge was still solid, and it was a popular spot for teenagers to go tag graffiti or just chill. We liked walking along the rails like tightrope walkers and taking photos of the sunset from up there. The river below wasn't too deep, but it moved fast, and you could see rocks and trees sticking up through the water. That particular day was warm and clear, leaves drifting across the water because it was early autumn. The bridge was steel and wood, with rust on the trusses and black bolts big as thumbs. The ties were dry and splintered, and they creaked when you stepped on the ends. Someone had painted a red crown on the center beam, and there were old band stickers peeling off the guardrail. I remember the smell of creosote mixing with river mud, and how the wind made the water sound louder between the trusses. We set our backpacks by the fence. We had a routine. Jason would test his balance on the rail, arms out, then hop down at the gaps and check for fishing hooks between the ties. I'd follow with my phone out, trying to film him, and he'd tell me to delete it if he looked dumb. We never climbed the beams or did anything crazy. We stayed inside the rail path where the boards were solid. If a board looked cracked, we stepped on the ones with fresh nails. If a knot was loose, we avoided it. We weren't stupid, and we kept away from the edge. There were little things that made the spot feel different that day. A fresh cigarette butt was mashed into the wood where nobody we knew smoked. A plastic water bottle was tucked behind a beam like someone hid it there. On the gravel trail up to the bridge, I had noticed a pair of footprints side by side, deeper at the heels, like someone had been standing still for a long time. Could have been anyone. Still, it stayed in my head. I kept glancing back down the trail when the wind went quiet and the water sounded closer than before. We took turns lobbing small rocks over the side and counting before the splashes to see how fast the current carried them. Jason found a beat-up disposable camera wedged between two ties, sun-bleached and cracked, and he joked about mailing it somewhere to get developed. The middle of the bridge always felt like a stage because the beams framed the sky in neat rectangles. The graffiti there was newer, brighter colors on top of older tags, like somebody had been out during the week. I could still smell paint even with the wind sliding through and the water pushing below. Every few minutes a car on the road across the river would pass, and the sound would bounce up to us through the trees. You could hear a dog bark from one of the houses downstream, and then nothing again for a while. We talked about teachers, lunch, new shoes, and who was moving away. Jason kept checking the time because he had to be home for dinner. I was thinking about a math test and how I didn't want the weekend to be over yet. It was normal. No reason to worry. The day felt lazy, slow, ordinary enough. Then I felt a small vibration through the board under my shoe, like someone had stepped on the far end. It was probably just the wind flexing the truss, the way it sometimes did when a gust came up the river. I looked down anyway and watched the water slide under us, brown-green and fast. Sunlight flickered on a long branch stuck under a rock and then broke apart. The air smelled like leaves and hot metal. Somewhere behind us, gravel crunched once, then went quiet again, and I felt my shoulders tighten without knowing exactly why, just for seconds. We drifted toward the middle without planning it, stopping where the beams crossed in a big X. Jason sat on the inner rail and drummed his heels on a tie. I stood with one hand on the cold steel, leaning over to see a tangle of logs jammed against a piling. A yellow leaf stuck to a wet patch on the wood, and then peeled off and floated away. For a while, that was all we watched. Just the water moving and the leaf spinning until it vanished downstream, and the surface went smooth again in the late light there. A gust pushed dust along the boards and rattled a loose wire on the side. I pulled my sleeves over my hands and shifted my weight, careful to keep my toes away from the cracked tie ends. Jason asked if I wanted to head back, and I said we could hang for a minute. The sun was still high enough that shadows under the beams looked like dark ladders running down into the water. I remember thinking how easy it would be to drop my phone and never see it again. Just watch it fall, splash, and vanish below us. We noticed a guy walking the tracks toward us from the other direction. Mid-20s, gray hoodie, the hood up, hands buried in the pocket. He moved slow, staring at the ties, not at us. People used the old line as a hiking trail, so it didn't feel strange. He looked tired, maybe sad. A lot of folks came out there when they wanted to be alone. Near the middle of the bridge, he stopped, and he lifted his hands to pull the hood back near our spot there. That's when I could see his face clearly for the first time. He looked younger up close, not much older than us. His hair was buzzed uneven on the sides like he'd done it himself. His eyes were red and puffy like he hadn't slept and had been crying hard. He didn't look at us. He stared down through the gap between the ties, breathing slow. The river pushed past like a conveyor belt full of broken branches. He pulled a cheap black phone from his hoodie pocket, tapped with both thumbs fast, no pausing, no retyping. When he was done, he squeezed the phone in his fist for a second. Then he stood, leaned, and tossed it over the rail. We watched it flip twice, flash in the sun, and vanish. No splash we could hear from that height over the wind. That was when the air felt thin. He put one hand on the guardrail and hauled himself up like he'd done it 100 times. He swung one leg, then the other, and sat facing the water. His shoes were dirty canvas, soles peeling off at the heels. His shoulders dropped when he settled. We understood, both at once. Jason said, "Hey, hey man," and I shouted, "Don't do that. Get down." My voice sounded small on the steel. He didn't look back. He stared down, hands on the rail beside his hips, fingers white from pressure. I took a step, then another, testing each tie. "Dude, "Please," Jason yelled. "We can talk. It's not worth it." The guy took a breath and let it out slow. He shifted, just a little. The wind paused and I could hear water scraping around the rocks and the low rattle of the loose wire on the side. He scratched at his wrist, then wiped his face with the back of his hand, leaving a line of wet on his cheek. I kept moving. My shoes slipped on grit, and I had to put a hand on the beam to steady myself. The metal was warm from the sun. "I'm coming over, okay?" I said. No answer. Just wait." I got close enough to see a scar under his eye and a cut on his knuckles. He turned his head and finally looked directly at me. I stopped because of that look. His expression wasn't angry or scared. It looked empty, like he had already left. I lunged the last 3 ties. He saw me move. His chin lifted a little, like a nod, but not really. He pushed off the rail with both hands. It wasn't dramatic. It was like stepping off a curb. He dropped straight, feet pointed down, arms tight to his sides. The space he left on the rail felt wrong, like something should still be there. The sound of him hitting the rocks wasn't a splash. It was a flat, heavy crack that echoed under the bridge and rolled up the valley. It bounced off the trusses and came back. My stomach turned inside out, and I hit my knees hard on the wood. I crawled to the inner rail and then backed away again. I threw up between the ties. Jason gagged and then threw up too, one hand on the beam, one hand on his chest. We both breathed loud, trying not to look down, but still looking. I pulled out my phone and my hands were slick. I wiped them on my shirt and dialed 911. I had to say the location twice. "Old rail bridge off County Road 11, I said. "No, the one by the water plant. No trains." "Yes, on the bridge." He jumped. The dispatcher asked for my name, my age, if the person was moving. I said I couldn't tell. She told us to stay where we were and not climb down. She kept me on the line while we waited. Waiting made it feel worse. The wind picked up and dropped again and the loose wire kept rattling. Jason sat with his back against the beam and stared at his shoes. I kept seeing the phone flip in the air, then his shoes, then that look. We didn't talk. Every minute I told the dispatcher I could still see the water moving around the rocks. I didn't look at the rocks for long. I stared at the bolts in the beam and counted them, then lost count. After a while, we heard sirens, but they were far. They came and went with the hills, and then got closer. I stood at the end of the bridge and waved. 2 county trucks and an ambulance pulled up on the gravel and stopped crooked. It had been 40 minutes since the call. A deputy came up the trail at a run, then slowed when he saw our faces. "You boys stay right there," he said. "Point to where?" I pointed to the middle span and then away because I didn't want to lean out again. Firefighters brought ropes and a basket. A paramedic asked, "Any chance he's alive?" I said, "I don't think so." They didn't make us watch. They told us to step off the planks and wait by the fence. A second deputy stood with us while they went down the bank. He gave us water and told us to breathe. I heard someone below say, "We've got him." And then quiet voices I couldn't make out. We stayed until the sun slid behind the trees and the trusses turned black against the sky. The deputy asked us to go over it step by step. We told him about the walk, the hoodie, the phone, the railing. He wrote everything down. He asked, "Did he say anything at all?" We both said no. "Did you recognize him?" "No." He took our parents' numbers and called them. Jason didn't look at me while he talked to his dad. They led us to the trailhead and sat us on the bumper of a truck. A paramedic checked our pulses and shined a light in our eyes. He handed us a pack of tissues in a plastic bag. I used both. Another officer came up with a clipboard. "You'll probably have some questions later," he said, handing me a card with a name and a number. "Call if you remember anything else." For a couple days, the bridge was taped off. The story went fast around town. People said a body was pulled from the rocks and that it was someone from the university. A week later, Jason's cousin, who worked part-time at the campus rec center, told him the name. A detective called my mom and confirmed it. The guy was a junior. He'd been missing a day. He was behind on tuition and rent, and he'd stopped going to class. His last text was an apology to his parents. They found the message on the account after they recovered the line. The phone never turned up. I slept badly for months. When I did sleep, the moment he looked at me came back first. Not the jump. The look just before. No sound. Just the river under the ties and his eyes red and tired. At school, I couldn't step on the edge of the bleachers without feeling the air drop away. I kept my head down on stairs. It faded with time, but it didn't leave. Sometimes I replay what I could have said in those seconds. Different words, a slower approach, a faster one. All the versions end the same. I know we did what we could. We called. We stayed. We told the truth. Still, I go back to it when the wind dies and the house is quiet and it's late. 4 years passed. I got older. I still think about that afternoon when I cross the river or see a gray hoodie or hear a rope rattle on a fence. When a friend goes quiet, I ask once and then again. I learn to take it serious and to check in when someone seems off. Doesn't feel like advice. It feels like what you do. I still see the bridge sometimes from the road. The red crown is faded now. The boards have more gaps. People still go out there to sit in the sun and look at the water. I avoid the middle span. I didn't go back up for a long time. When I finally did, I stood by the fence and kept my hands on the steel until the shaking stopped. Then I left. "4 years ago, my friend Alex and I were leaving the sports bar Touchdown in downtown after meeting up with some coworkers. We decided to call it an early night, heading out around 1 a.m. on a weeknight. I didn't know that area well, so we were driving slowly to make sure we didn't miss any turns. I had my window cracked open because the bar had been stuffy and I felt slightly dizzy. The streets were empty at that hour. Suddenly we heard a woman screaming and crying somewhere nearby. The sounds were coming from the sidewalk on our right, and we slowed down to figure out what was happening. The dashboard clock blinked 1:07 a.m., a digit that made the cabin look colder. I tucked my hair, kept breathing. We rolled through a yellow light and crept past a row of dark storefronts with metal grates pulled down. Neon signs flickered in a pizza place and a vape shop, but inside was dead. The crosswalk paint looked worn and shiny from street cleaners. There were long lines of parked cars on the right, bumper to bumper, and a dented bus stop bench with an empty paper cup rolling under it. The scream came again, sharp and messy, then turned into rough sobbing. I eased my foot off the gas. The engine hum felt too loud in the quiet block. I leaned toward the cracked window without thinking. The air outside smelled like hot pavement and stale beer. Somewhere a bottle clinked and kept rolling. I told Alex I couldn't see anyone. She told me to keep it slow. We passed a gap between two vans, and I craned my neck to look down the sidewalk. Nothing moved. For a second I thought the sound bounced off the buildings, and I was hearing an echo. We went another 10 yards. A streetlight on our right blinked and buzzed. There was a tow zone sign bent sideways. In our headlights, I caught a smear on the sidewalk that looked wet, maybe from a spilled drink. I kept my hands tight on the wheel. My phone buzzed in the cup holder with a spam call I ignored. The crying got closer, more frantic, like the person had run out of air and was dragging it back in. My heart was knocking. but my mind stayed on the road. I wasn't familiar with the one-way streets there, and I didn't want to drift into the bike lane. I checked the mirrors. No cars were behind us. Up ahead, the light at the next intersection switched to red, and we coasted to a stop. Our headlights washed over the backs of the parked cars. The scream snapped again, on our right, too close to be far down the block. I clicked on the right blinker out of habit even though we weren't turning. The clicking filled the car. I could make out little details. A cracked taillight on a blue sedan, a broken curb, a plastic bag snagged on a signpost. The crying had words now, but they came out chopped, like someone talking while sprinting. I couldn't make out the exact sentences, only please and help. I felt a breeze through the window crack. It smelled like the alley behind a bar. I nudged the car forward a couple feet, just to get a better angle past a van with a ladder on top. I thought maybe someone had fallen. Maybe a couple was fighting. I didn't see anyone else on the sidewalk. It was like a stage after the show. I turned the wheel slightly toward the curb to keep distance from the center line. The steering felt light in my hands. The sobbing flashed into view all at once. A young woman in her mid-20s came out from behind a compact car like she had been hiding there. She stepped into our headlights, then kept running. Her blouse was torn down one sleeve and hanging, and her jeans were scuffed at the knees. She was holding her left shoulder tight with her right hand. Her face was pale and blotchy, wet with tears. She was barefoot. She stumbled on a crack and caught herself on the hood of a parked SUV, then pushed off and made a beeline toward us at a diagonal. Alex reacted before I did. I heard the click of the lock slamming down. She reached across me and hit the window switch, rolling the glass up until there was just a small crack left. The noise of the street cut down to a thin hiss. The woman hit my door with her palm and slid down to the handle level, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. "Please," she said, voice raw. "Help me. He tried to take my bag. He hit me." Her breath fogged the small strip of glass left open. I had a clear view of her shoulder where the fabric was torn. The skin there was red and scraped. A black strap cut across her collarbone, and the strap was twisted like someone had yanked it. She kept looking over her shoulder toward the parked cars, not behind her so much as through them, scanning the gaps. Her hands shook. She tried the rear door handle, then the front one. Both were locked. My first instinct was simple. I reached for the door handle on my side to let her in. I didn't think about anything except getting her off the street. The cabin lights would pop on. She could get in, and we could pull away and go straight to the main road. That was the plan in my head, fast and clean. I tightened my grip to pull. Alex grabbed my wrist before I moved the handle. Her fingers were cold and strong. "Don't you dare open that door," she whispered, low and sharp. She didn't take her eyes off the street while she said it, watching the situation carefully. She kept asking for help, but the way she did it made Alex tense. It sounded too big, like a stage cry, louder than it needed to be at the window. The words came out in long strings, no pauses, like lines read fast. When she realized we weren't unlocking anything, everything about her face changed. The tears shut off like a faucet. Her mouth flattened. She shoved her fingers into the small crack at the top of the glass and tried to hook the edge, like she could pull the window down. Her voice dropped and went rough. "Open the door," she said, low and angry. She pushed her shoulder against the glass. I felt the car rock a little. Alex moved her hand to the shifter and clicked it into drive. She told me to keep my foot steady. I eased the car forward an inch. The woman grabbed the front door handle with both hands and yanked, hard, like she could rip it open by force. She leaned her whole weight on it and tried to keep us from moving, feet sliding on the asphalt. Her fingers worked at the gap again, nails scratching at the rubber strip. I told her we couldn't help, that we would call 911. She didn't listen to that. She lifted her head and shouted, not at us, but over us, out into the empty street. They're driving away. The words bounced off the storefronts. That was the signal. 3 men broke out of the darkness at once, fast and practiced, like they had been hunched between the cars waiting. One came from behind a delivery van. One stepped out of a recessed doorway. The third popped up from the far side of a pickup bed. All of them moved straight to our doors like they knew the plan. Alex hit the gas. The car lurched and the woman lost her grip and fell back. I heard her palms slap the side of the door as we shot past the parked cars. The men ran after us, shoes slapping the road, arms pumping. One tried to cut across to the passenger side, but we were already pulling distance. The light went green and we took it. I kept the wheel straight and my eyes on the lane lines. In the rearview mirror, I saw them slow down and gather in the middle of the street. The woman stood with her hands on her knees, then straightened and walked back to the sidewalk like nothing hurt. The 3 men closed in, heads bent, talking quick. One of them kicked a plastic cup and it skittered across the road. We put 2 blocks between us before I let up on the gas. I turned at the next main road where there were 2 open bars and a late-night bodega with bright lights. I pulled into a bus zone and stopped just long enough to breathe. The locks were still down. My hands were tight on the wheel. Alex didn't look at me right away. She was still watching the mirrors, checking for anyone following. No one was. Traffic was light. A taxi passed. Far behind, the street we came from was dark again. Only then did the shape of it land in my head. The empty block. The parked cars tight together. The way she had been placed. Alex said this kind of thing gets used a lot in big cities, especially late. Bait, she said. Woman at the window. Doors open. Guys come in fast. She kept it flat, not dramatic. She told me to never crack a window that wide and to never lean toward a stranger. If someone really needs help, call it in. Keep moving to a crowded spot. It was practical talk, steps, nothing extra. I nodded, watching my turn signal click. I was embarrassed at myself for reaching for the handle. I kept that to myself and started driving. We went to an all-night gas station near the river and pulled in under the canopy for a few minutes. The operator in the booth was eating chips and watching a small TV. It felt safer there because the lot was bright and a camera pointed at each pump. We didn't stay long. We took the river road back to my place. I parked in the garage, not on the street. I watched Alex walk to her car and waited until she was inside and moving before I went upstairs. The next day after work, we went to the police station together. The lobby had old tile, a low counter, and a row of plastic chairs. A TV on the wall showed muted weather. We gave the desk officer the time and the cross streets. He handed us forms and asked for descriptions. I wrote what I remembered in simple blocks. Woman mid-20s, torn blouse sleeve, jeans, no shoes, hair dark, shoulder scraped, black strap twisted. 3 men, one taller with a shaved head and a gray hoodie, one with a baseball cap and a short beard, one with a dark jacket and white sneakers. I drew a quick map of the parked cars and where they came from. Alex filled in the makes of the vehicles they used for cover as best as she could. Delivery van, pickup, compact sedan. An officer came out from a back room and asked a few quick questions. He wanted the exact words she yelled. I repeated it. They're driving away. He wrote it down. He asked how close they got to the doors. I showed with my hands the pull on the handle and the fingers in the window crack. He nodded and said there had been more of these lately in that area, mostly at night and after last call. He said they were fast, and they picked people who looked lost. He told us not to stop on an empty block. If we saw someone in distress, call 911 and keep moving to a lit place. He said to keep doors locked, windows up, and to be careful with the instinct to help. It was short and clear. They took our contact info and said a detective might call if they matched the description to other reports. We thanked him and left. Outside, the afternoon looked ordinary. Buses pulled up. People held coffees. I could still see the woman's flat eyes when the crying cut off, the way her body angled to block the door. It sat in my head like a picture. I changed my habits right away. In the car now, I lock doors as soon as I sit. I keep windows up unless I'm moving and there are people around. I stick to the main routes I know, even if it takes longer. I skip shortcuts down side streets at night. If someone waves me down, I don't stop. I turn on my hazard lights, keep rolling, and call for help. I save the non-emergency number in my phone. I keep my purse zipped and stowed under my seat instead of on the passenger side. It isn't dramatic, just small steps. A week later, I drove past that same block during the day. It looked normal. Coffee shop open. A dog tied to a meter pole. The metal grates were up and everyone was busy. It was strange to see the difference. At night, all the edges are harder. In the daylight, it looked like nothing happened. I realized how fast it can flip. I think about that woman a lot. How well she played it. How fast she switched. I still want to help people, but I do it from a distance now. If someone really needs help, the call still goes out. I stay behind the glass and keep moving. I hate that it has to be like that, but I don't forget the way the men stepped out when she shouted. I changed how I drive and how I move after dark. I'm more careful with strangers at windows, no matter how helpless they seem. This experience taught me to distinguish between real calls for help and potential traps, though I still regret having to be so suspicious of people who might genuinely need assistance. I was working at this 24-hour diner in downtown Phoenix, usually taking the late shift because the tips were better and it fit my class schedule. The place sat on a corner with a faded neon sign that buzzed more than it glowed. Inside it was always coffee smell and fryer oil, cops at the counter, night drivers in booths, nothing fancy. After midnight the sidewalks got strange. Tents under the overpass, people arguing in the bus shelter, little handoffs at the alley mouth. I kept my head down, clocked out, and walked straight to the curb when my shift ended. That night I got off at 1 a.m. and the heat still came up from the sidewalk like a vent. Friday had bled into Saturday, and usually there were taxis idling by the hotel on the next block or ride shares rolling through. Tonight the street looked emptied out, like someone turned the city off. A stray plastic bag slid along the gutter. The diner door clicked locked behind me. I took out my phone to request a ride, saw the little spinning wheel, and put it back in my pocket. Across the street, I noticed this tall guy in a black hoodie leaning on a light pole. He had the hood up even though it was warm and kept shifting like his shoes hurt. He scratched his neck, then his jaw, fingers twitching, eyes sliding around without landing on anything. He did this little bounce on his toes, then paced one step left, one step right. The hoodie had frayed cuffs and dark stains at the belly. I looked away fast. I told myself not to stare, but something about him didn't fit. A city bus rolled past without stopping, empty seats glowing under white light. The driver didn't look over. The only open place on that block besides the diner was a 24-hour pharmacy, and even that had a security gate pulled halfway down for restocking. A billboard hummed. Somewhere a bottle broke, and then nothing. I heard my shoes stick and peel on a dark patch of syrup on the curb. I adjusted my backpack strap and kept my face calm like I wasn't paying attention to anything. I guess I was looking at him too long because he pushed off the pole and came across the street toward me. No cars, no one to put between us. I turned like I had somewhere specific to go and started walking toward the intersection. My shoes felt loud. I kept checking over my shoulder, quick glances, just the way you do when you don't want to make it obvious. He kept the same pace, not fast, not slow, eyes shaded by the hood. I didn't like the way he never looked away. I cut down the block, aiming for the hotel canopy because sometimes a bellman would flag a cab for us. The lobby was dark behind glass, chairs up on tables, only a night clerk at a desk lit by a screen. I scanned the street for anything moving. Nothing but the bus far away and a couple of red taillights disappearing. The corner store's metal grate had a chain through it. A build-your-own salad place had all the chairs stacked like bones. I kept walking, not fast enough to look scared. I looked back again, and he was closer. I cut right, off the main drag, thinking I could loop around to the light rail stop where the cameras and the ticket machines lit things up. My mouth was dry from the diner coffee. My keys were in my right pocket, and I slid them between my fingers the way one of the cooks told me to. The sidewalk here had no storefronts, just a closed office with mirrored windows and a bank with the lights off. My footsteps echoed. He stopped at the corner like he was deciding. I kept my head forward, eyes flicking to a security camera mounted above the bank door, a little red LED blinking. I was hoping for anything, another person, a delivery truck, even a scooter kid. The block was dead. I crossed the street and saw an alley with a security light halfway down. The air smelled like hot oil and dumpster rot. Somewhere a siren wailed and then faded until it sounded like a TV in another apartment. Then, to my relief, he turned down that side street and disappeared into the dim. I exhaled once and kept moving, not speeding up, not slowing down, just staying straight like I meant to be there. I reached the next corner and stepped off the curb to get a better view down the avenue. I raised my arm a little, the way people do when they're trying to make eye contact with a cab. The asphalt felt open and exposed. A warm wind pushed napkins along the median. I checked both directions for headlights. Nothing close. A security truck cruised 2 blocks away and kept going. A traffic light cycled through green and yellow and red on an empty corner. The city felt hollow and slow tonight. I thought about crossing back to the diner and waiting by the door, but I didn't want to bang on the glass and make it a scene. I stayed in the street, just off the painted line, trying to look like someone confident and normal. I kept my ears open for footsteps. I heard the faint scrape of rubber on concrete from the side street he'd taken. He came back out of that side street, only he wasn't alone. 2 more shapes peeled off the wall behind him. Same dark clothes, same hoods low, spreading a little as they hit the sidewalk like they'd done this before. They didn't look at each other. They kept their hands down by their sides. I lowered my arm and took 1 step back off the lane, as all 3 lined up and started walking aggressively toward me. I started walking as fast as I could without breaking into a run. Their footsteps got quicker too. I heard them start shouting across the street, but it all blurred together. Threats, a laugh, the sound of shoes slapping pavement. I kept my eyes on the next intersection and scanned for anything with headlights. A car rolled by slow with its roof light dark. It was a taxi finishing his shift. I stepped straight into the lane with both hands up. The driver hit the brakes hard. He cracked his window 2 inches and said, "I'm done." I pointed behind me and said, "They're following me." He looked past my shoulder and saw them. His eyes changed. He unlocked the back door with a click, and I slid in. The AC blasted my face. He pulled forward fast, maybe 50 yards, and then stopped under a dead streetlight. He looked at his meter and shook his head. "I can't take you," he said. "I'm off." I grabbed the handle like I would get out, but the 3 guys were still in the mirror. They were cutting across the road, closing the distance. One tapped the hood with his knuckles as we sat there. The driver put the car in park. My bag strap was across my chest. I kept my feet planted and didn't move toward the door. I said, "Please." The word came out small. He looked back at me, then at the men, then back at me. He exhaled and took the car out of park. "Seatbelt," he said. I clicked it in. He pulled away smooth, turning off the main road, quick right, quick left. He checked the mirror again. "They still on us?" I turned to look. The three were jogging along the sidewalk, but we had space now. He kept to side streets where there were cameras on corners. He reached to the dash and hit a button that made his roof light flash. He drove like he knew the area well. He said, "I'm not letting you out till we find you another car. You're not safe like this." His voice changed, not annoyed anymore, firm and calm. He called someone on speaker. Another driver, he said, stayed late on weekends. No answer. He kept cruising, eyes moving, hands steady on the wheel. We passed a strip mall with a closed nail salon, a taco place with metal shutters, a laundromat with one old man sitting in the doorway smoking. Every time we stopped at a sign, he left space to pull around if someone boxed us in. We looped back toward the hotel row where the drivers sometimes parked to talk. On the fourth block, we saw another taxi nosing out of a space, roof light on, and no one in the back. The first driver honked twice, a short pattern. The other driver pulled alongside on the empty curb. They knew each other. My driver rolled down his window. "Hey," he said, pointing at me. "She's got guys chasing her. Get her to her place. I'll pay if she can't." The second driver leaned over and looked at me. He had gray hair and a baseball cap. He nodded once and unlocked his back door. I said thank you to the first driver, over and over. He waved it off with his hand. "Go," he said. "Now." I grabbed my bag and moved quick, door to door, scanning the sidewalk. Nobody nearby. I slid into the second taxi and closed the door hard. He locked it right away. The second driver pulled into traffic. He glanced in the rear view. "You all right?" he asked. I told him my address. He nodded. "My kid's your age," he said after a beat. "This city at night is no joke." His jaw clenched. He checked the mirror again and again. He drove the speed limit. Didn't try anything dramatic, just steady. We hit a few lights. He positioned the car behind delivery vans so the view into the back was blocked. I asked if he could take a different route to avoid the main station. He said, "We'll go up 3rd, then cut across by the hospital." He knew where the patrol cars sat sometimes. He kept to well-lit streets and avoided alleys. He told me to keep my head down when we passed groups on corners. He flicked the interior light off so the cabin was dark. The engine hummed low and smooth. We passed a gas station with people outside arguing. A guy in a tank top waved at the taxi, but my driver kept going. We caught a yellow and rolled through. He gave a quick look at the sidewalks every block. "Saw 3?" he asked. I said yes. He made a noise, not a word, just frustration. "Cowards," he said. "They think it's easy." He checked the door locks again without looking. He kept me talking enough to know where I lived, but not enough to pry. He asked if someone could meet me downstairs. I texted my roommate and got no answer. He said, "Then I'll wait." His hands were relaxed, but his eyes stayed busy. He didn't touch his phone. He didn't mess with the radio. We passed a police SUV sitting at an angle outside a closed bar. He flashed his lights twice and kept moving. We turned onto my street. It was darker than the others, trees hanging over the road, a few porch lights on. He slowed in front of my building and pulled right up to the door where there was a security camera above the mailboxes. He put the car in park and looked at me in the mirror. I reached for my wallet. He waved it off. "No," he said. "Go inside. I'll wait." I tried again. He shook his head once, firm. I opened the back door and did a quick scan both directions on the sidewalk. Empty. I stepped out with my bag in front of me and went straight to the door. My key stuck a second, and then turned. I pushed into the lobby and hit the interior light. I turned so he could see me through the glass. He was idling at the curb, eyes on the door, one hand on the wheel. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and looked back again. He was still there, looking down the street, and then back at me. The elevator opened. I stepped inside and tapped my foot. When the doors opened on my floor, I went to my apartment and unlocked it, then leaned out over the railing to see the street. His car was still below, engine sound floating up. I waved once. He lifted his hand out the window, then pulled away slow. I locked my door, checked the peephole, then checked it again. After that night, I changed how I did things. I asked a coworker to walk me to my car after shifts. If I had to close, I called for a ride from inside the diner and waited until the car was at the door. Sometimes a friend would pick me up and stay on the phone while I walked out. It became routine. I told the morning manager about the 3 guys so she could warn the others. She said she'd talk to the owner about adding a camera outside or a brighter light by the door. I didn't argue about shifts anymore. If no driver was available, I stayed inside and kept working prep until the sky started to lighten. People teased me at first, then they stopped. No one wanted to walk alone after that. I never found out what those 3 planned, and I don't need to. The memory I keep is the empty street, the sound of footsteps, the way they spread out like they wanted to circle me. I also remember the first driver's hand hovering over the gear shift, deciding, and then choosing to help me, and the second driver staring down an empty block until I was safe behind the door. Growing up in rural Iowa, I was about 10 years old and in 4th grade when this happened. Because of frequent illnesses, I looked younger than my age and was noticeably smaller than my classmates. Our family lived in a farming area about 5 miles from school, and the school bus dropped me off each day at a stop near Johnson's grocery store. From there, I had to walk 3 blocks home along a quiet residential street. One October day after getting off the bus, I noticed a blue sedan that was moving slowly behind me as I started my walk. It was far enough back that I could pretend it was nothing, but it kept my pace in a way that felt deliberate. I told myself the driver was looking for an address. The leaves along the curb made a dry scraping sound as the car idled forward. I kept my eyes on the sidewalk and the chipped curbstones and tried to ignore it. I held my backpack straps and kept a steady pace. The air smelled like dry leaves and diesel from the bus. Johnson's had a wooden sign that squeaked when the wind hit it. I counted mailboxes as I walked. The same cracked sidewalk with weeds pushing through. I passed Mrs. Miller's yard with the rusted bird bath and the plastic pumpkins on her steps. The blue car stayed behind. Not close, just there. I looked over my shoulder once. The driver's face was not clear through the windshield glare. I saw a shape, a hat maybe. The car rolled, then paused, then rolled again. No horn, no words, only the soft sound of tires against grit. I looked forward and kept walking. My house had a white porch and black railings. I could see our mailbox from the corner. I did not run. I did not want to look scared. When I reached the gate, the car continued past and turned at the end of the block. I went inside and set my backpack by the door. My mom was boiling potatoes. The kitchen window looked out to the street. I washed my hands. I did not say anything. I thought maybe I imagined the slow follow. Maybe the car was just old and the driver careful. The next morning I had a low cough. I took my small bottle of syrup and left with my jacket zipped up to my chin. School felt normal. Math, reading, a film on farm safety that buzzed on the old TV cart. At the final bell, the bus rattled along the gravel and dropped us by Johnson's like always. I stepped down, the big steps that felt too high for my legs, and the smell of apples from the store hit me. The same blue sedan was on the far side of the lot. It pulled out after the bus left. Again, it kept the same slow distance, like someone inching in a line that never moves. I tested my speed. I walked a little faster. The car matched. I slowed to tie my shoe. The car crept and waited, angled near the curb, engine steady. I felt my heartbeat in my ears, but I kept moving. The 3 blocks felt longer than usual. Every house had something to fix. A hanging gutter. A loose fence board. I named the problems as I passed them to keep my mind straight. By the end of the week, it was the same every day. Monday through Friday, the sedan showed up like part of the routine. It waited near the store, then followed at a crawl down the quiet street. It never passed me. It never stopped close. It just tracked me. The sky got darker earlier. The air turned sharper. I started to plan small things. If it got close, I would cut through the alley behind the red garage. If the alley was blocked, I would go straight to Johnson's and stand by the counter. I kept the plan in my head like a map. At school, I started to watch the clock more. I packed my things fast so I could be first off the bus and ahead of others. I thought if I had other kids around me, it would feel safer. But by the second block, it was always quiet again. Only the car and me. I tried to look casual. I did not want the driver to think I saw him. I did not want him to think I was a challenge. I kept my eyes forward and my hands on the straps. I counted cracks in the sidewalk. I did not tell my parents that week. My mom worried when I coughed hard, and my dad came home late from the field. It felt like something I could handle if I stayed alert and stuck to the route. I also did not want to be told to stay home. Missing school meant catching up later, which was always hard for me. So I kept my routine and watched the mirrors on parked trucks for the blue car's reflection. One day the bus arrived a few minutes early. The driver said nothing about it. He just nodded and opened the door. I stepped down to the lot with only 2 kids behind me. The store lights were not on yet. The sky was pale and thin. I walked faster because the wind cut through my sleeves. My house would still be locked at this hour, but the spare key was in the chipped frog planter near the steps. I felt better knowing that. I crossed the first block without seeing the car. I thought maybe I had been wrong all week. Maybe it was a coincidence. I turned the corner to our street, saw the white porch, and slowed down. I glanced toward the curb across from our house and saw the blue sedan parked under the elm tree. It sat close to the gutter, straight, like someone who knew they might be there a while. The engine was on. A thin line of exhaust drifted toward the storm drain. I went up our steps and kept my body sideways so I could still see the car through the porch railings. My hands felt clumsy on the key and the frog. I pushed the door open and set my backpack inside. I did not call out for anyone. The house was empty when I came home first. I turned to the window next to the door and looked through the lace curtain. Behind the wheel sat a man in his 50s wearing a dark cap, staring intently at our house. His face was heavy around the jaw, the kind that looks like it never smiles. He did not talk on a phone. He did not drink coffee. He just watched. Both hands on the wheel at 10 and 2. I could see the small twitch of the wipers pushing away mist. When our eyes met, he quickly drove away. I told my parents about the car, but my older brother Tim immediately claimed I was making it up to get attention. I did have a habit of fantasizing at that time, so Dad was initially skeptical of my story. However, Mom believed me, and the next morning drove me to the bus stop herself. The blue sedan was indeed there, parked at the gas station across the road with the engine running. Mom got a clear look at the driver, an unkempt man with long, unwashed hair who was obviously watching the children waiting for the bus. When the bus came and took me away, Mom tried to see the license plates, but they were intentionally covered with mud. On the ride, I watched the lot fall back and felt the bus shake as we hit the potholes by the feed store. I kept my backpack on my lap. I went to class and did my work. At home that evening, my dad said maybe it was a contractor looking for work. He said maybe it was nothing. Mom did not argue. She wrote the time on a piece of paper and taped it by the phone. She checked the porch light and the back door. She told me to keep my key in my pocket and not in the frog planter anymore. The next morning, she drove me again. Frost was on the grass by the ditch. She parked near Johnson's and kept the engine running. The blue sedan sat at the gas station like before, idling by the air pump. The man in the dark cap watched the kids by the sign. He just watched. Mom told me to wait in the car until the bus door opened. When it pulled in, loud and big, she said, "Go." I climbed the steps and looked out the rear window. She eased closer to the sedan to check the plates, but mud covered them. My worried mother immediately called the school and local police. By the time I arrived at school, I was already being called to the principal's office. It turned out the same man in the blue sedan had been spotted in the school parking lot, watching children during recess. The principal asked me simple questions. What color? How close? What time? They told me to stay with my class at all times. Recess was quiet. Teachers walked the edges with radios. I looked toward the lot. A car moved behind the dumpsters and then stopped out of sight. When the bell rang, we went back to math. After school, I rode the bus home as usual, but a police patrol was already waiting at my stop. The blue sedan sat near the curb by Johnson's, angled out. When the driver saw the police, he quickly turned around and sped toward the highway at high speed. The officers ran to their car and pulled out. I watched through the bus window as the chase went past the feed store and the water tower. The sedan cut left onto a farm road. Dust rose behind it. The cruiser followed but lost a second when a tractor eased from a lane and blocked the turn. The sedan took a quick right by a stand of trees and vanished toward the back roads he apparently knew well. After that, we could not see them anymore. Parents gathered near the lot, and the officers who stayed took statements. One deputy came to our house and asked to see where I walked. He told us to call if anything appeared again. That night, a cruiser rolled down our street twice. I never saw the blue sedan or its driver again. Police conducted an investigation for several weeks, but the man was never caught. It turned out that neighboring counties had also received reports of a suspicious man watching children near schools, but there was no evidence of specific crimes. The officer called once a week at first, then every other week. Mom kept a notebook by the phone with dates and times. They checked cameras at the store and gas station, but the angles were bad, and the tapes showed only the hood and smear on his plates. The pages filled and then stopped. My parents became more cautious. Dad fixed the side gate and put a new hasp on the shed. Mom set rules. If the bus was late, I would wait inside Johnson's and ask the clerk to call home. I would walk with other kids when I could. I would not wear headphones. I would change my route if a car shadowed me more than a block. I learned the usual cars on our street and noticed when one did not belong. If something seemed off, I went to a door with people behind it and asked for help. Years passed, and we moved to a different house when I was older, but the habit stayed. When I learned to drive, I counted the same car through 3 turns. If it matched me, I would pull into a grocery lot and stop near the door. My brother called me careful and rolled his eyes. I let him. Now as a mother, I've passed this vigilance onto my own children, though sometimes I regret that they can't enjoy the same carefree childhood I had before that incident. I walk them to the bus when I can. If I cannot, I stand on the porch and watch them to the corner. We keep simple rules. Do not approach a car that calls you over. Go into a store if you feel watched. Ask a clerk for help. I still think about that week when the air turns sharp each fall. I remember the scrape of leaves in the gutter and the blue sedan idling near the curb. I do not guess at motives. The pattern was enough. He showed up, he watched, he moved when someone came close. We saw him and we reacted. I often think about what might have happened if my mother hadn't believed my story, or if police hadn't responded so quickly. Three years ago, I was on my annual solo hiking trip through the Appalachian forests, something I do every year to escape Chicago's urban chaos and remember my rural Wisconsin childhood. On the third day, the trail got thin and scratchy. It was quiet in that heavy way the woods get when the wind dies. I had no signal, only a paper map and a steel bottle in my pack. The dirt was damp from last night's rain, and my boots left clean prints. I had started before sunrise and hadn't seen another hiker all morning by myself. I came around a bend and saw the corner of a roof behind honeysuckle and wild grape. At first I thought it was a shed. When I pushed through the vines, the shape opened into an old wooden house, half hidden by overgrown bushes and vines. The windows were cloudy and broken. Roof shingles lay in the grass. Paint had peeled down to bare gray wood. Vines had grown into the eaves and ants worked under the siding. Whoever built it had set it on a small rise above a dry creek bed. Now the place leaned. One side of the roof was partially collapsed. The walls were sagging. The front porch was almost completely destroyed. Just a few boards with nail heads rusted to orange. The air smelled like wet wood. I stood there and listened. No road noise, no voices. Only a woodpecker far off and drip from leaves. The voice in my head told me to move on and stick to the trail. Private property, rotten floors, nails. But curiosity pulled harder. I grew up around barns and empty sheds. I told myself it would just be a quick look around. The front steps were more memory than steps, so I went around the side through thinner brush. A small porch door hung cracked open. I checked the floor with my trekking pole, then put my weight down slow. The boards held. I kept moving toward the broken main door. Entering through the broken front door, I found typical signs of a long-abandoned home. The air was cold inside. Furniture was overturned. Plaster had crumbled into pale mounds under a cracked ceiling. Thick dust covered every surface. A dark line showed where water had run down a wall for years. I kept my pack on so I could bail if a floor gave way. The living room opened just inside. A rug was half rolled and stiff with dirt. Scattered remains of old magazines and newspapers lay across it. I crouched and flipped a cover with one gloved finger. The date was 1988. Another had a yellowed sports page from 1987. It was enough to say the house had been empty since the late 80s. A narrow bookcase had buckled and spilled cheap paperbacks. Dust puffed when I touched the page, and the smell was sweet stale. I moved slow and tried not to breathe deep. Every step sounded bigger than it should. The floor had a soft spring, but not the kind that means a drop. In the corner by the window, a small TV sat with wires hanging, screen smashed. It looked like someone had left in a hurry and never came back. I eased through a doorway into the kitchen. It was in terrible condition. The sink was rusted, the basin eaten through in spots, and black water dripped from the faucet in slow drops. The sound was the loudest thing in the house. A cabinet door hung by a single hinge and ticked the frame when a draft pushed through. Where a refrigerator should have been, only the refrigerator frame remained, coils bare, and a door shell with rotten insulation hanging loose. A few rats scurried past when I stepped in, bodies a blur along the baseboards. I set my feet and held still until the scrape sounds died out. Under all the mess, the room felt stable enough for a brief inspection. I checked the seams near the outside wall. Through a crack, daylight cut a thin line down to the counter. My camera lived in the top of my pack. I pulled it free, looped the strap around my wrist, and woke it with a thumb press. I took a photo of the sink first, framed tight on the rust and the black drip, then widened to the counter with the open cabinet. I shot the refrigerator frame with a boot toe for scale. I told myself to keep the shot steady and the steps slow. The shutter click sounded too loud in the empty rooms. I peeked back into the living room and took wider shots of the papers, then a close one of the 1988 cover so the date read clear. The house shifted with the wind and I paused, listening for anything bigger than weather. Nothing came. I told myself this was enough, and I would leave after a few more photos. Light from the doorway threw a dull rectangle across the floor, and dust floated through it like seeds. I stepped back into the kitchen, placing my boots where I had stepped before. I took 2 more images of the faucet and the cabinet hinge. I didn't open drawers. I didn't try the back door. I kept my hands where I could see them and watched the floor. I took 1 shot of scuffs on the door frame at waist height and another of the refrigerator coils. The plan was a quick look. I had my route out in my head. 3 steps back, turn left, straight line to the door. Before leaving, I stood between rooms and let the camera take 1 last wide frame of the living room. The crushed chair, the stiff rug, the scattered pages, the dust, all of it. I didn't change anything. I didn't move anything. I just lifted the camera and did what I came to do. I photographed some interior details, imagining what life had been like for the former inhabitants of this place. The staircase was narrow and creaky, the handrail loose at the post. I tested each step with my heel and took it slow, shoulder brushing the wall where wallpaper hung in strips. Dust rose with every shift. At the top, a short hall ran left and right. A small window at the end showed trees and gray sky. The first door on the left opened to a small bedroom. A child's crib sat under the window with one side missing. The mattress was thin and curled at the corner. Scattered toys lay on the floor. Wooden blocks, a plastic ring stack with faded colors, a small stuffed dog with one ear torn. A dresser with missing knobs leaned forward. The air smelled dry and old. I didn't touch anything. Across the hall was a bathroom. The mirror was broken into a spider web. A toothbrush lay at the back of the sink, bristles splayed. The tub was green with mineral stains. A towel had fallen to the floor and fused to tile. A ceiling vent clicked with a slow draft, metal tapping metal. I kept moving. At the far end was a larger room with a double bed and a carved headboard. The headboard had flowers and a name scratched faint in the center. The mattress had fallen sideways, half off the frame. A nightstand sat at an angle with a lamp missing its shade. A closet door stood open and empty. My steps made the floor complain in long groans. I circled the bed to check where the mattress had slid. Under the bed frame, in the shadow, lay what I first thought was a broken mannequin. Then my eyes sorted the shapes. A rib cage curved white and dull. A skull lay turned to the side. The clothes were there in tatters, fabric collapsed into itself. Dust clung to everything. I didn't move. I didn't breathe hard. Next to the bones sat a purse. The zipper was open and the inner pocket had a clear window. Inside it, a driver's license showed through, warped but readable. The photo was of a woman, dark hair, straight look at the camera. The name was Margaret Smith. The date said she would have been gone more than 20 years. A ring lay in the dust near the purse. It was a simple band, dulled to a soft color. I backed away without touching the frame or the purse. My hand found my pack strap and held it. I looked around for any other sign. No tape, no bags, no signs someone else had found this. The room was silent, only small ticks in the wall. The house felt tighter. I left the door open and returned down the stairs the way I came up, slower now, putting my feet in the same exact spots. Each step sounded like it would be the one to give, but the wood held. In the living room, I didn't take more photos. I walked straight to the broken front door, stepped to the porch, and then out into the brush. Outside, air felt warmer. I moved away from the house and back toward where I had come through. When I reached open ground near the dry creek bed, I pulled out my GPS and held it up to clear sky. The screen grabbed satellites and I saved a waypoint. I typed a short note. Old house. Remains. Upstairs. Then I started for the trail. The nearest town on my map was 8 miles west. I set a pace I could keep. The trail was narrow and sometimes lost under ferns. I cut around blowdowns and kept the creek noise to my left. I checked the GPS every 20 minutes to make sure my line was right. I drank little and didn't stop to eat. I cleared the tree line near late afternoon and hit a gravel road. The road ran to a state highway where a gas station and a bait shop sat across from a diner. I headed for the gas station because it had people and a phone sign on the window. Inside, a ceiling fan clicked over coolers. A man at the counter looked up. "I need the sheriff," I said. "There's a house in the woods. There are human remains." He picked up a phone and made the call. He passed it to me. I gave the details. My name, where I was, the waypoint, the direction from the old fire road. The dispatcher told me to wait there. "Do not go back," she said. "A deputy is on the way." A patrol car rolled in about 40 minutes later. The deputy was mid-30s, quiet, and wrote down everything I said. He asked me to guide them. "We'll go slow," he said. Another unit showed up, then a truck with county plates, and a van I recognized as the coroner. We left 2 cars at the station and drove the rest to the fire road turnoff. We parked at the gate and went in on foot. I led and kept my pace steady. The deputy behind me radioed distances and turns. Branches dragged our sleeves. At the creek bend, I pointed to the gap in brush. "There," I said. "The house is on the rise." At the clearing, they spread out. One deputy went around the side with me and checked the porch. "Stay outside," he said. "We'll clear it." They went in slow with flashlights, boots careful. After a minute, one called out that the upstairs was stable enough. The coroner and 2 techs went inside with cases. Yellow tape went up between saplings. I stood near the dry creek and answered questions. When did I find it? What did I touch? Did I see anyone else? I told them I touched nothing upstairs. The sun slid lower and mosquitoes came out. The forensics team moved with steady rhythm, bags, labels, a camera flash. The deputy at my side held a small notebook and kept his pen moving. An hour later, the coroner came out and spoke with the deputy. He walked over to me. "Preliminary looks like natural causes," he said. "No obvious trauma. Could be a heart attack or stroke. We'll confirm." He asked me to sign my statement and leave my number. We walked back to the road in the blue light. At the station, I washed my hands in the bathroom sink and watched the water turn gray. At the diner, a woman pouring coffee asked what happened out there. The deputy had already talked to someone. By the time my cup filled, the cook said, "Margaret Smith? Folks been saying her name here for years." According to local residents who came in after shift change, Margaret Smith had gone missing 23 years ago. They had searched the woods for weeks back then. She had lived alone in that house after her husband's death. No one knew she had died in her bedroom. The property had fallen quiet, tucked back, and people stopped going that way. I finished the hike earlier than planned. I signed out at the ranger station and told them I was done. On the trail back to my car, every rustle in the bushes made me stop and look. A snapping twig sounded close, and I turned and waited until the woods went still again. I stayed on the main path and moved steady. At camp, I packed fast and double-checked my trash. I left the site clean and headed for the lot. It was late afternoon when I reached my car. I sat with the door open, feet on gravel, and checked the GPS waypoints again. The one I had saved was bright on the screen like a pin in a map. Logically, I knew the house was an exception. It didn't help. I kept seeing the bones in the purse window. I stopped cutting cross-country and stuck to marked signs. When a trail split, I chose the one with footprints and fresh boot treads. Back in Chicago, I replaced my map case with a newer one and added a rule to my packing list: no exploring structures. On later trips, when I came to old foundations or a roof line through trees, I kept walking. I took breaks near water pumps, trailheads, and shelters with posted notices. I slept lighter and put my food up faster. Sometimes I think about the distance between the house and the road. It wasn't far. It was just hidden. My reflection is short. People vanish at the edge of common places, not at the center. That's all I keep. I leave the rest alone.